Good evening, and welcome to this extraordinary full council meeting. I am Councillor Will Lane, the Mayor. Since we last met, the Grenfell Tower inquiry has published its final report into the tragedy. The report laid bare the failures that led to the awful events of that night and showed a community who felt abandoned by authorities in the aftermath. As made clear in the report, this council failed to protect and listen to its residents and should have done more to keep people safe in their homes. The council has organised a series of community meetings and drop-in events, listening to residents to help inform its formal response in November. This meeting forms a very important part of that, and as such, we've made some changes to public speaking tonight. As Mayor, I wanted to ensure that as many people as possible can come here and speak to the Council's leadership. So there will be 11 speakers and the leader and the opposition spokesperson who will respond after all questions have been asked, rather than after each question. I would like to say a massive thank you to everyone who is here tonight to speak. I know that this takes huge courage, and understand that some of you, many of you, may feel frustrated at having to again come to these meetings to put your views to the council. I encourage all councillors, including the leadership of this council, to listen and ensure that these views help inform the council's response and future direction. After the public speaking and leaders' speeches, we will have a debate on the report about the implications of the inquiry for this council. This is an important and very sensitive subject. Many of you will, quite rightly, feel strongly, but I encourage everyone to debate this report with respect, and please listen to all views expressed. I would also kindly ask you to stick to time, to allow all speakers equal time and as many people as possible to speak. It's because of needing to ensure that everyone gets an equal chance to speak that I will intervene if speakers go over their time limit. Finally, before we start, we will pause for a 72-second silence to remember those who died. This is something we do before every public meeting, but it's important that we do not become institutionalised to it. We must remember why our meetings start in this way, and the failures of this organisation that led to that being necessary. It's no less poignant now than it was 7 years ago. So can we all please pause for a 72-second silence? Thank you. Please sit down. Item number 1 is the minutes of the council meeting that was held on the 24th of July. The amended meeting minutes of the last meeting are on members' desks in the additional papers. Are the minutes agreed? I declare the minutes agreed. Item number 2 is declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare a disclosable pecuniary or any other significant interest in any item being considered at tonight's meeting? Item number 3 is special announcements by the Mayor, and I have no special announcements. Item number 4 is the Chief Executive's communications. Chief Executive, could you please report apologies for absence or lateness from this meeting?
Thank you. I've received apologies from Councillors Hamish Adurian, Tom Bennett, Joanna Gardner, Dahabo Issei, Lucy Knight, Eva Jeddett, Quentin Marshall, Stephanie Petit, Mona Adam, and I've received apologies for lateness from Councillor Roberto Whedon-Sands.
Thank you, Chief Executive.
Mr. Mayor, one further apology for lateness from Councillor Toby Benton.
Thank you, Councillor Lowry. Item number 5 is public speaking. For the benefit of members and those watching, please start your 5 minutes by saying who you are and whether you're speaking on your own behalf or for others. I ask very politely to please keep your contribution to 5 minutes so that all speakers have an equal opportunity to be heard. Given the importance of this topic, I'll invite speakers to be passionate but respectful of others. Ms. Emma O'Connor, please address the Council.
Hello. First time attending the Council. Thank you for hearing me out. We've waited far too long for the inquiry to be heard, and due to, just to introduce myself, I'm autistic, disabled survivor of Grenfell Tower, the 20th floor. On the night of the fire, well, on the day of the fire, we got a phone call at gone 12 o'clock to find out whether we'd still survived, and it was put down on the London Fire Brigade that the council had registered that we were disabled and asked whether we were out, which is, to be perfectly honest, totally unacceptable. But due to my own other personal circumstances, I found out that PEEPS has been only accessible to elderly people in 24-hour sheltered accommodation, and yet there's still stay put advice everywhere. How many, if you guys can tell me how many of those 1,300 tower blocks are still cladded in RBKC, that would be perfect. And just a personal message, stop using the fire brigade as a scapegoat to get out of telling them the truth of what is actually cladded. Money, it doesn't matter to anyone apart from lives matter more than money. But that's all I have to say. I know I was given 5 minutes, but that's all I can say.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connor. Mr. Nabil Shukir, please address the Council.
Okay, thank you. My name is Nabil Shukir. I am a next of kin, immediate family, who lost 6 family members and co-founder of Grenfell Tower Trust. We work with family members, and the inquiry, we've asked them, we've talked about them, with them, about the inquiry, and they was not happy with the inquiry, how the inquiry has failed the families. It has failed them in many ways, in the way that they should have looked into the helicopter, which they didn't bother. They should have looked into how racism, you know, played a part in within the council, or should I say from the TMO, but they didn't look into. There were so many things that they haven't looked into, that families didn't even ask for the inquiry. They asked for prosecution before the inquiry, which is a real upsetting and disgraceful for them. Yet it has come out, so we have to look at what we can do and how we can get it right. Until today, families have been waiting for the council to apologize for what has happened, for what they had done, because at the end of the day, they were responsible for hiring contractors to do what they did, and what they did and not checking them over and blah, etc., has cost us our families' lives. And now we are here to speak on our families and to resolve and get what was done wrong. An apology, they talk about the council making changes and having changes and doing changes, yet nothing's mentioned that an easy sorry is the best way to start, that you got it wrong and you want to make a change to the families and the people that lived in the tower and the residents. You owe it to everybody. You need to change. We can't keep telling you and asking you change. Change comes from within, and it has to start from within you all. We can't keep coming here and asking, please, what you've done was wrong, and now you need to change. That is the first thing, an apology. Second of all, police looked into discrimination, racism, and they found within the police they were racist. The fire brigade did the same thing, looked into, and they found out there was racism in between. Families now are asking that the council do the same, because they have an obligation to do a change. If you want change, it has to come within. And when you look into how, if you want to start fresh and make a good fresh start, and you owe it to the family, you need to work from within to see that there is no racism within the council, so that you can offer a better service to the people that you owe. We've been failed by the council quite a lot. I spent a week in hospital just recently. And that week in hospital, I turned around and I asked for help. There was no help to be given. No help to be given from the dedicated service that was provided or should have been provided for us. Why have I gone through this? I want to ensure that nobody else goes through the help, that when they need help, that they get their help. I want to ensure, for example, marriage breakups. I've had a marriage breakup, and many other families within Grenfell have had marriage breakups. Nobody's looked into marriage breakups within the council for them because of Grenfell, and this is because of Grenfell. But yet they're very quick in separating families, but not bringing them together or looking into how they can reconcile them, how they can try and get them together. And if it doesn't work, then okay, fine. The council has failed us. I ask the council, please, You need to look at helping, supporting them for the long run, not just for these extra 3 years, because now is where we need your help financially and mentally. And it must start now for the long run, because the inquiry has just started. Prosecution is many years down the line, and there's still a long road to justice. And everybody is going to need your help. So I ask the council, please, look into what I've just said and acting on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shakur. I now invite Ms. Samia Badani to please address the council. Samia.
Good evening. My name is Samia Badani. I'm the elected chair of Bromley House Tenants and Residents Association. I apologize in advance. I've got a bad cold, so I might be coughing. In its report, the inquiry stated that, I quote, although our investigations have concentrated on the 7 days following the fire, we acknowledge it continues to have a searing effect every day on many of those affected. Now try multiply by 270. That is 1,893 days of being treated with a lack of respect for human decency. Try multiply by 228. That is 6,840 days of contempt towards us by RBKC and the TMO. That's over 20 years of fighting to be treated with respect. That's over 20 years of opportunities for you to show us, your residents, that our lives matter. Grenfell did not start on the 14th of June 2017. It was a preventable tragedy. It is about people whose humanity you and the TMO denied. I ask myself time and time again what we as residents could have done more to support our neighbors in Grenfell Tower. Then I remember that at the same time, we were fighting to stop you and the TMO from destroying our homes, from changing our lives forever. And I'd like to thank Ed. With everything that he was going through, he supported and fought against the regeneration of the Silchester estate. We felt helpless by the sheer power of the institutional indifference, the same feeling we felt the night of the fire as we watched, as we cried, as we felt the pain, as we waited for you to evacuate us in Bromley House. We didn't matter then. It took you 3 weeks to come knock on our doors and realize you had left us behind. Where were you when I lost consciousness as the smoke had filled my home? I don't know how long I was out, but I remember getting up and running around to find mass for my neighbors. Where were you when I could not sleep in my own home? When were you when I had to be prescribed an asthma pump for the first time in my life? Where were you when we were trying to print flyers of the missing friends of our children? Were we not human beings like you then? To add salt to the injury, we were made to fight to make you see our pain, and as if it weren't not enough, you went after us, you worked against us. Many of the injustices were created by people before you. You have inherited them, and with them this culture where we in the immediate community are seen as second-class citizens, people like an officer wrote, and I quote, from the jungle. We were described as a divided community that have made a divided community, and this attracted all these outsiders, advocates, translators, or whatever they invented as a title, all those people who have made a career out of Grenfell. No, we don't need saving. No, we don't need people to speak for the immediate community. We don't need any intermediary. No, we don't need people to tell you when we are triggered, when they have no clue of what our trauma is. They don't get to use our PTSD to serve their agendas. How can you even think that there is a choice to be made? You continue to facilitate them. You continue to dilute our voices. You continue to tell us that other groups, other people, and it's about them too. We had enough of people trying to have a base in the immediate community so they can have a voice and speak on our behalf. Where were these people 7 years ago? Where were they 20 years ago? You continue to put their interests before our health, before our safety, and before our well-being. This has to stop. It is offensive to compare those of us who are democratically electable, who are accountable, who are transparent, and who are from the community with people who have no mandate. We are the ones who keep on having to prove to you that we have a mandate. There are no grounds for you to ignore our voices, our requests, and our needs in Bromley House and beyond. It's not complicated. We never were and are still not a divided community. When you disrespect Bramley House, you disrespect all of us. When you disrespect Silchester Estate, you disrespect all of us. When you disrespect the Lancaster West Estate, you disrespect all of us. When you disrespect Grenfell Walk, you disrespect all of us. When you disrespect Henry Dickens Court, you disrespect all of us. When you disrespect Nottingdale, you disrespect all of us. When you disrespect Grenfell United, you disrespect all of us. When you disrespect Nabil and the Grenfell Tower Trust, you disrespect all of us. We are not divided, and we are asking you to stop pitching people against. We have said from day one that we will stand forever with the residents of Grenfell Tower and the Bury families. This position has never changed, and there is no one or nobody who's going to divide us. So today, I'm asking you to treat us all as human beings. I'm asking you to stand with our community, and when I say community, not these people using this word community, we're talking about people who are residents and people who have been affected by the tragedy. I'm asking you to stop comparing us with all these chances, all these people who think that it's a joke to talk about Grenfell. I'm asking you to give us the respect that we deserve. It is only when the respect is given that you, as a council, will learn and change and create a legacy together with the people whose life is in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Badani. Ms. Nahid Ashby, would you please address the Council?
Good evening. I stand before you tonight, not just as a long-term resident in the immediate Grenfell community, but as someone who carries the weight of a tragedy that haunts Nottingdale. We all knew from the very beginning that Grenfell Fire was not just an accident. It was a catastrophe born of negligence, laxity, disgrace, disregard for very people that this council and the government are meant to serve. We all knew the truth. Maybe not in such graphic details, but we knew the gist of it, and so did you. You knew because you promised us change. 72 precious lives were lost that night, and thousands of people were profoundly affected, some just by witnessing that inferno. 7 years on, it feels as though nothing has changed. All we've had in those long years are words, so many words, promises, empty and unfulfilled. Grenfell inquiry laid bare the failures, yet we still continue to feel unheeded and left in the lurch. The same culture of indifference that allowed Grenfell to happen still lingers in the corridors of power. I know change takes time, but in the last 7 years, what little has changed is too insignificant to be noteworthy. We've had numerous meetings, we were invited to speak and contribute, but our voices, our distress and our concerns still met with cold indifference, arrogance and paternalism. It's as if we've been pursuing a Sisyphean chore. Residents who live in the shadow of the tower were told we'd be at the heart of rebuilding this community, yet outsiders with delusions of grandeur are given higher platform to speak for us, as if we were incapable of speaking for ourselves, while our voices evaporate into the ether. It gives the impression that the lessons that should have been learned are nothing but footnotes in a forgotten report. How can there be true change when the same dismissive culture remains? When we are still treated as statistics, not human beings? The inquiry report must trigger a turning point, even though after 7 long years we are still waiting for justice. And on that said, it feels like we will forever be waiting for Godot. I stand here tonight to echo the unheard voices of Silchester Estate and the immediate community that still grieves and struggles. We don't want more platitude and more hollow gestures. We want action. We want accountability. We want to know that this council will never again allow the residents to be treated with such contempt. The time for change is long overdue. And I say one last thing. Change is not just a word. It's a responsibility that demands action. It means putting people before politics, with decisions made openly and transparently with us, not behind closed doors with outsiders. True change happens when residents like us are not only heard, but respected, valued, and taken seriously, with real action following the concerns we raise. But for this change to be meaningful, it must start from the top, with leaders who prioritize serving the community, not protecting their own positions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Ashby. Mr Edward Dafarn, would you please address the council?
I'm going to read Grenfell United's statement on the Phase 2 inquiry report and our continuing expectations of RBKC. The publication of the Phase 2 inquiry report into the Grenfell Tower fire is a stark reminder of the profound failures that led to the entirely avoidable loss of our 72 loved ones. The report leaves no doubt that the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea and its tenant management organisation failed in their duty to protect and respect their residents, with tragic and devastating consequences. 7 years on, while the inquiry has exposed these failings in explicit detail, we continue to seek accountability, change and justice. The findings confirm what we have always known: the council's neglect, indifference and total disregard for their social housing residents created a culture that put our lives at risk, and that jeopardy ultimately contributed to the death of 72 people. Grenfell was a result of systemic failures, years of ignoring resident concerns and treating those who raised safety issues as a nuisance rather than stakeholders in their own homes. The council has had over 7 years to end this toxic culture, but they have only made glacial progress. Going forward, we expect nothing less than a complete transformation in RBKC's culture and practices. Our community has suffered enough from empty promises and shallow apologies. We demand real change, starting with the future leadership of the council. Many of the current leadership team at RBKC were in positions of power prior to the fire. They were part of the problem, and they have struggled to be part of the solution. It is imperative that when a new leader of the council is selected, they are somebody who has a deep knowledge and intimate understanding of Grenfell and the North Kensington community. Grenfell United proposes that any candidates for leadership or future senior cabinet positions within RBKC need to have spent time on the ground in North Kensington, be familiar with local organisations and be known and respected by our community. Without this, we doubt any real change will ever really happen. Implementation of all the inquiry's recommendations. The inquiry report has made extensive and far-reaching recommendations to prevent another Grenfell. implementing personal emergency evacuation plans, PEEPs, for vulnerable residents, improving the fire safety management, and ensuring regular, independent fire risk assessments must be priorities. We expect the Council to continue to act on every single recommendation, fully, transparently, and without delay. The safety of tenants cannot be compromised, and every recommendation is crucial to ensuring that the lessons from Grenfell are learned. A ban on materials from companies involved in the Grenfell inquiry. The Council must continue to ban the use of any products manufactured by companies implicated in the inquiry from being used anywhere in the borough. These companies' products contributed to the fire, and these same companies must not be allowed to profit from public contracts or the housing projects in our community. Respect and dignity for all residents. The inquiry exposed years of disrespect and disregard for the dignity of Grenfell's residents. This culture of viewing tenants as difficult or less important is not only discriminatory, but deadly. We demand that RBKC prioritise compassion and respect for all tenants, recognising the needs of our community. The Council must rebuild trust by involving tenants meaningfully in decision-making processes. It's not enough to consult. Tenants must be heard, respected, and included in shaping services they depend on. A cultural shift to accountability and transparency. The culture of secrecy, concealment, and self-preservation within RBKC and its housing management must end. We expect the Council to adopt a policy of complete transparency, acknowledging past mistakes and openly addressing residents' concerns as they arise. RBKC must also implement measures that ensure robust oversight of housing management and a firm commitment to holding itself accountable when things go wrong. And finally, justice and accountability. While the criminal justice process unfolds, we expect RBKC to continue cooperating fully with investigations. The families of those we lost deserve justice, and it is vital that this Council does everything in its power to support that process. Grenfell was a product of indifference and negligence. It must serve as a turning point and a touchstone for cultural change within RBKC. Going forward, we expect RBKC to take every action necessary to ensure no other family ever has to endure the pain we have suffered. This is not just about changing policies or procedures, it's about changing the very heart of how this Council engages with its residents. We will continue to hold RBKC to account every step of the way until meaningful, lasting change is delivered. This is a legacy our loved ones deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Defan. Ms. Safia Yousfi, would you please address the Council?
Pain, hurt, grief, anger, frustration, and betrayal. For the past 87 months, these emotions have weighed heavily on us younger members of the community, myself included. We're just beginning to grasp the depth of this tragedy, yet it has left a deep-rooted mark on our lives. Every day has been filled with profound pain and grief, mixed with the anger and frustration that stem from feeling betrayed by those who we trusted to keep us safe. As we gather today, we take a moment to reflect on the tragic events of the 14th of June 2017 and the inquiry that aims to reveal the truth and ensure that such a horrific incident never happens again. The second phase of this inquiry has exposed the systemic failures that led to the loss of 72 lives, mothers, fathers, brothers and sisters, ordinary people whose only crime was living in a building that they called home. Their voices cry out for justice, and we must answer that call. One of the most disturbing revelations in the executive summary of Phase 2 states that certain aspects of the response demonstrated a marked lack of respect for human dignity and decency. This unsettling truth underscores how many of us felt abandoned by those in authority during a time of unimaginable loss. The Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea neglected to address the diverse needs of its residents, particularly during Ramadan, leaving many of the Muslim community feeling invisible, as if our cultural and religious needs did not matter. In their hour of need, many turned to family, friends, and local organizations such as Al-Manar Mosque, places that stepped in where the authorities failed. While it's our duty as a community to look out for one another, it's crucial to acknowledge that it should not have been our sole responsibility to carry this weight. Young people like me should not have had to bear this burden, especially in the aftermath of such trauma. The council should have stepped up, yet many of us were left to navigate our own overwhelming emotions. It's deeply unjust that during this time of vulnerability, young people felt they had to stifle their grief and be strong for others when we should have been able to lean on the very systems designed to protect us. I want to take this moment to express my heartfelt gratitude to everyone in our community who came together during this incredibly difficult time to support those in need. Thank you for showing compassion and empathy to all, regardless of their religious, cultural, or social backgrounds. Your kindness shone brightly when our council failed us. However, we must remember that Phase 2 of the inquiry cannot merely serve as a means of gathering evidence. It must lead to real consequences. How can we allow the same institutions that let us down to remain unaccountable? We must demand that those responsible for the neglect, the inadequate oversight, and the systemic failures that led to Grenfell Tower fire face justice. The lives lost can never be reduced to mere statistics. They were vibrant individuals, and their deaths demand our unwavering commitment to accountability. We cannot afford to sit back and wait for change. We need immediate action. Every resident, regardless of background, deserves access to safe housing. Fire safety standards must not just exist on paper, they must be enforced. We demand investment in our communities, support for those who are vulnerable, and a promise from our leader to prioritize our safety over profit. The trauma from this tragedy has cast a long shadow over our community, particularly affecting young people like me, who have witnessed the aftermath and its impact on families and friends. In closing, I urge you, councillors, to carry the weight of this tragedy in your hearts. Let it fuel your determination to fight for justice, to fight for accountability, and to fight for a community where we can all feel safe. The memories of those we lost should not be forgotten. They should guide us in building a better future. We owe it to the victims of Grenfell and to every member of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yousfi. Mr. David O'Connell, would you please address the council?
Thank you, Mayor and councillors. I'm here. This time I'm here speaking really for myself as a resident of Lancaster West Estate and of what happened when I was there on the night of the 17th and the 14th of June. And really, this report has brought a lot back to me because one of the things I feel a lot living on the estate is that not an awful lot has changed. And it's one of the things that's been a theme from everyone here, despite the fact that council was complicit in the death of 72 avoidable deaths. Nothing has changed in the systems of the council, and it's easy to say that, so I thought, well, maybe I should go and look at what the council has promised and what has changed. And there's been so many reports. I mean, first of all, there was the task force to scrutinise the council, and they still said that the pace of change was very slow. There were problems with scrutiny in the council. I looked at maybe there was another review in 2023. Maybe things had changed more then. But again, they said the same things. There were problems with the officers, with training. There was problems with the way the council worked. I looked further on, 2024, where they were talking about problems with what the council had promised to people, the lack of money, and what hadn't happened with the change. Because though Elizabeth Campbell speaks very often about change, and she's often mentioned that as something the council aims for and something they want to look for, I haven't seen much evidence of it. And all these different task forces and reports and audits of the council haven't really shown any significant change, because it's still the same council. I still see the same people sitting here. Elizabeth Campbell I first met when the school was going to be built on the playing fields of Lancaster West. So I remember talking to you then and saying that I didn't think that was the right place to put the school that was in the way of the fire engines on the night when the fire happened. And I think really that's where the change needs to come. From the top, from the councillors, you need to realise that just because someone doesn't look like you or doesn't have the same culture, that doesn't mean they're not someone that is worth regarding, and their life is not worth as much as another councillor's or anyone else you know. I find it really sad that I'm still here 7.5 years later, and the estate I live on, though the promise was to make things better for people, I don't wonder what it's actually doing for them, because we now live in a building site. We are paying more money than ever before to live there. People are being charged for things they didn't want, and people are being driven away. So fundamentally, the council has achieved what it always wanted, was to regenerate the estate and clear it out, because people can't stand living there anymore. And I find that really sad that nothing positive or constructive has come out of that night. And I really wish that the report, though it just tells me what I knew already and what I'd seen in the days of the inquiry, had come after some prosecutions. Because the only thing I can think that will make any difference to this, and what people really want who live in North Kensington, is to see people pay some consequences for what happened. No one has gone to prison, no one has suffered, no one who caused this to happen has been arrested or sent to prison. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connell. Mr. Abbas Dadu, would you please address the Council?
Mr. Mayor, Councillors, ladies and gentlemen, I speak today as an elected representative of the Lancaster West Estate Residents Association in my role as Vice Chair. Before I start, I would like to express our full support for everything every individual they said here, or the major stakeholder of this tragedy. We totally agree with everything they said. If the Council has learned anything from the Grenfell inquiry, it is the vital importance of listening to the collective voices and concerns of residents. The Council has pledged to embody the change that residents have rightfully demanded, and we accept it not only to implement all the recommendations of the inquiry, but also but also to take meaningful and decisive steps towards real transformation. This must involve working closely with residents to ensure we no longer suffer from the same systemic failings. You must be different. All the steps are needed to effect real change on the ground, and the Council must invest in making this change a reality, particularly in the immediately affected area within the Notting Hill community. For example, we ask that RBKC use their platform to better understand and address the needs of Lancaster West residents who have been living in the midst of building works which started in 2013 with the demolition of the old leisure center, followed by the construction of the new leisure center, and then KAA, and followed by refurbishment of the Grenfell Tower, which we all know what happened to that refurbishment. That's why we are all here. And we have still been living with the aftermaths of the tragedy, and we live in the building site. Most of our residents suffer because council been too slow to delivering the refurbishment and providing respite for residents. You must fulfill your commitment to supporting our neighbors and delivering the 21st century model estate that was promised to residents. We are committed to collaborating with other elected bodies and community groups, and to challenging both RBKC and the government to ensure residents are receiving the living conditions and support that they deserve. Together, we aim to amplify our collective voice and to hold the responsible bodies accountable until this change is fully realized. The Council's primary responsibility is to invest wholeheartedly in the recovery and rebuilding our homes, community assets, and crucially, the trust within our community. There remains an urgent need to improve services that continue to be inadequate for the Grenfell community and to address the refurbishment of key facilities. We ask that you give residents a clear and robust plan for addressing the Grenfell inquiry report, putting residents' recovery and suitable living conditions at the forefront. Doing this would be a small step but necessary part of achieving true justice for what happened within our community. However, for all of us, persecution of those who caused the tragedy would be the way to justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dadu. Ms. Nuha Shentoof, would you please address the Council?
My name is Nuha Shentoof, and I'll be speaking to represent the youth of the community. First, I'll read a short speech written on behalf of my sister, and next I'll read a poem I've written myself. It's funny we live in a borough that holds royal status, yet is also one of the top 10 boroughs with the biggest wealth divide between the poor and the rich. I would like to ask the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, what is so royal about murdering 72 people? 18 kids, 1 unborn baby. It's ironic we were taught to never lie, yet a building our friends and family lived in was built off of your lies. You are everything we repel and pray to never become. You are money hungry and heartless. The inquiry itself has exposed to us all the wrongdoings you and the companies you have hired have done. It has exposed the discrimination presented to the Muslim community. It is all written in black and white, yet no one has had the human decency or empathy to put their hands up and come forward. Where does your moral compass lie? When it's one of us committing a crime, no questions are asked. The consequences are quicker to appear. But when it's you, it takes near a decade for us to even receive a book telling us what we already know. It seems the system is built against us and for you. You ask us to trust you. Trust is earned, not through your fake words of comfort, but through your actions, through doing your job and providing services that we ask for, and not what you think seems fit. You are a public service to serve the public and not destroy their communities. A question that our youth ask is, why are we still pleading for justice? Why is this even a conversation? If it was your family in the tower, what would you have done? If it was your 4-year-old child's life cut short for a couple £1,000, how would you have reacted? Thank you. I'll now read a poem. And they were full of lies. It took 72 lives for them to realize the complaints were actually cries for help, but it wasn't dealt with. All they were saying is, I see you, but shortly we were visiting them in the ICU, and I'm trying to ID you, because now I see you for the monsters you truly are, because you failed, and now you should be jailed, because they're 6 feet underground, and you're still trying to cover the little sound we have for a couple £1,000 for the community to bring you immunity. We won't be fooled by your cruelty, so I'm going to use this opportunity to call you out. Just because you flee the country doesn't mean it erases your guilt so easily. You say that less than 10% of you are bad. You know, it's quite sad someone can have the nerve to say that when you're all sitting there in power and not standing up for anything that happened in that tower. We grew up here and you have to respect your elders. But how can we respect people who can't even provide a safe shelter? They say respect has to be earned, but betrayal is the only thing that we've learned. You knew about the extremity of the tragedy, and now you're still living happily. You knew what would happen with that installment, but for you, the money was more important. Now justice still hasn't been served, and we still haven't been heard. And now I think about it, it's absurd. It's a bit absurd. Why have we still not been answered? Why are they out here after they murdered the 72 lives, yet they still haven't realized the complaints were actually cries because they are all full of lies?
Thank you, Ms. Shentooth. Honorary Alderman Mushtaq Lashari, would you please address the Council?
Mr. Mayor, Madam Deputy Mayor, Councillors, last time I spoke here was early 2010, and I never was aiming to come back to speak to you or others. I'm very thankful that there are some residents at the back and some of your officers are listening as well. I think, Mr. Mayor, you used 3 very important words in your introduction: abandon, failures. The most important thing now is action. I think it is everybody should be very determined to take actions. I think you have just seen Neha and Safia, the future generation. We might be getting old, and I can see many of my old colleagues sitting here and many very new colleagues sitting here who are representing the local people. We are representing North Kensington. We are representing Lancaster West Resident Association. I moved in my flat on 17th of January 1983, and I have never moved out of it. My children grew up, my grandchildren are growing up in the same area. So when we speak to you, we are speaking from our hearts and what we see and face every day. I was part of TMO even before it was established as a pilot program. But I tell you, TMO has failed, local authority has failed, all the councillors who sit on TMO, they have failed the residents. So when we are talking about today and we talk about justice, don't forget that we might be gone, but Safia and Neha will be there, and those who are your children will be there to face the consequences of failure of not only the local government, but central government as well. I will be, as a chairman of Lancaster West Resident Association, I have never wanted to do that because I do a lot of work on peace, justice, tolerance in the world. But I have been pulled back to just represent those who can't speak themselves. And there are many in Lancaster West and North Kensington. They are elderly people who can't meet anybody for days. They are losing their stability. They are losing their speaking power. And I will be asking you to fund us to at least start something, because after Grenfell and COVID, which was the most challenging challenge to the world, I think this is one of the tragedy which was the largest in the Western world, democratic world. And we see double standards every day. We must speak truth, and we should always be there. And I will be very fair, very transparent, very trying to build a bridge in between the local authorities, central government, and the residents, angry residents. You have just heard from 10, 11 of them. They are very angry for 7 years. Not 7 years, but the work in that area started much before. I was one of the instruments who campaigned for 14 years for Kensington Aldridge Academy, and I was very pleased that we eventually achieved it because our children were going into failing schools. My own children went to Hammersmith School, which was one of the failing schools in 80s and 90s. So I think it is wonderful to have those facilities, but they should be safeguarded, that when tragedy happens, there are safeguards. And can I conclude? Obviously, I can speak for hours, and which I don't want to. I will hear my other colleagues who will respond, and I wanted to speak after leader and opposition has responded. But I have asked and requested, and thank you for allowing me to speak apart from other councillors. I think justice is the most important thing. But the justice delayed is justice denied. We all know that. We hear it every day. But I think it is very important that we take action as soon as possible. Justice is delivered not only for those 72 people, but thousands of people who live in the near vicinity of Grenfell Tower. I see it every day. I hear it every day. And I hope some of you have heard those bereaved survivors during the commission report and others. I cried many times, and I remember some of you who came to that, they cried there as well. We are crying even today for justice, for your action, and look into the history, learn lesson from history. We can't change the history, but we can look at it, remember, and learn the lessons. And I hope we all will do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alderman Lashari. Councillor Campbell, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I'd first like to start by thanking everyone who's come so much for being here, and actually, I really mean that. It hasn't been easy listening, but it shouldn't be. And it's important that everyone in this chamber listens to the people who've come tonight. And I would say I've met many people over the years and heard some of the things that you said again tonight. And it's important, as I said, that everyone hears it. And let me just touch on some of the things people have said, because I think we do need to reflect on it. You know, the profound pain and grief, humans feeling people just completely disrespected and disregarded them. Safi saying we carry the weight of this tragedy in our hearts. And Nahid, I think you were saying this weight of the tragedy that haunts Notting Dale, and it should haunt all of us here too. You know, Samia talking about lack of respect, that people didn't matter, institutional indifference, any profound failure, neglect, indifference, no compassion. That's very hard to hear, but it's true, right? So we need to start from the truth. And as I said, we accept all the findings of the inquiry. And to Nabil's point, that he hasn't felt that we've apologised, I'd like to apologise one more time, unreservedly, for the fact that this council failed our residents before the refurbishment, during the refurbishment, and in the aftermath. We didn't keep people safe, and we didn't protect them, and for that, I'm truly sorry. And as Samir has said, it wasn't us who picked up any pieces after the tragedy. It was the community. The community wasn't divided. It did come together, and in an extraordinary way. And we should really acknowledge that. The next thing I'd like to say is, I think we've really heard about this need for justice and I think this council will cooperate in any way we can with the police. We have done so to date, and we will continue to do so. Then the next thing really I heard tonight is this need to change. It's not enough to acknowledge, and it's the need to change. And whether we've gone far enough or fast enough, probably not. I don't think so. There are some places where we have changed, and to Emma Louise's point about PEEPs and safety information boxes and towers and fire safety, we've really tried to ensure that our blocks are safe now. As the inquiry said, the system is broken, but we are trying to be as safe as possible. And across London, I think a lot of landlords and councils are finding it difficult, but we are absolutely determined that it happens here. We talked a bit about the aftermath and people feeling abandoned, and what Nabil said about us not knowing our residents and not having that cultural competency. I don't think that would happen now. I think our resilience team has a very good relationship with the VCS and with many of the multi-faith communities, but I accept entirely it did. And then to turn to what Abbas, David, Bushtaq were saying about Lancaster West Estate, I absolutely accept that it is so hard to live in the middle of a building site. I've been there. I understand what it's like. And we probably, well, yes, we should have acted faster. Our contractors should be there quicker. And there is something about the way we handle contracts and get on with stuff. So we do need to look at that. And Mushtaq, thank you very much for your offering to help us, you know, with the residents and with trying to get extra resources into the estate from government. So I really appreciate that. So just to reflect once again, I don't. There's no more apology I can make. I think I apologise absolutely unreservedly.
Councillor Campbell,
yes, I will. I just say we do need to change, and we are determined to do so, and we will continue to do so. And I appreciate the change has seemed very slow in many people's eyes.
Councillor Simmons, would you like to respond?
Thank you very much. And I am responding in place of Group Leader Kassim because I am one of the ward councillors for Nottingdale, so we collectively thought that would be appropriate. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for coming, especially when I know that this place holds such upsetting memories for many of you, and for continuing to engage with this painful process with such courage, grace and patience. The leadership of this council especially needs and must here take on board and be responsive in its future actions to what you have to say. We may feel, based on bitter experience, that this hasn't happened yet, but I continue to hope against hope that it will. So it's important now that everyone who can bear to do it continues to speak out and to put your concerns and your experience into the public record. I know that what you have expressed tonight is shared by many, many others in the community and beyond. And I know, or at least have some inkling of what it takes to continue after 7 years to come here and speak. I know that 5 minutes is not enough time to convey or do justice to the intolerable pain and suffering, or to the unnecessary additional indignity, distress and hurt that this council has caused to the bereaved, survivors and immediate local community over the last 7 years through its refusal or inability to listen and change. When you most needed and deserved, and still need and deserve, kindness and compassion, to be met with a council that was and still is too often insensitive, othering, patronising, dismissive, divisive, manipulative, self-serving and at times downright cruel, is a wickedness that I find very difficult to understand or forgive. Grenfell itself was clearly not a sufficient wake-up call to prompt sufficient self-reflection within the leadership of this council to put residents, and in particular the Grenfell community, first before self-interest, before reputation, before prejudice, before political allegiance. This, I believe, is the reason why we have not seen the sort of change that is necessary as an absolute prerequisite before we can even start to begin to heal from all of this. Anything less is just rearranging the deck chairs, and we have seen far too much of that. The wounds are still raw, and to this day RBKC too often continues to twist the knife, intentionally or otherwise. The inquiry report has confirmed on paper what most of us already knew: the culture of contempt, discrimination and neglect, the gaslighting, the silencing, intimidation and disparagement of residents. This is what, shockingly, has been allowed to continue for 7 years. This is what needs to change. Thank you to everybody for coming, and I will continue to press for everything that you are asking for.
Yeah.
Thank you.
In relation to item number 6, I understand the whips have a proposal with Councillor Addenbrooke to propose.
Mr Mayor, understanding Order 42, I wish to move that Standing Order 30 be suspended this evening to allow Councillor Campbell and Councillor Ali up to 10 minutes each for their speeches.
Is that seconded?
I beg to second.
Is that agreed? Then it is agreed. I now invite the Leader of the Council, Councillor Campbell, to address the meeting for up to 10 minutes. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And once again, thank you to everybody who has spoken tonight already. Your honesty, patience, candour helps us to do better and be better, and I mean that sincerely. It's important that we hear from as many voices as possible tonight and over the weeks ahead as we think about what the way forward will be. And we can only do this in partnership with our communities and with our residents. And my door is open to anyone not able to speak or come along tonight, especially as we embark on a full and formal response to the Grenfell inquiry report in November. Mr Mayor, tonight is a special meeting called at a pivotal time, and I am glad to see so many of us in the chamber tonight. Many of you will want to speak and reflect for the first time on the Grenfell Tower inquiry report and what it means for us, for our communities, and for the future. This is important for the organisation, and I'm looking forward to hearing valuable contributions from colleagues right across the chamber tonight. You are all helping to shape our response to the inquiry and the future of this organisation. I hope that the public questions and statements we've already heard this evening have helped us all to understand that 7 years on, we still have work to do and major areas and themes we really need to focus on. Mr Mayor, in the last week I've attended meetings with the local community and bereaved and survivors, and there have been common themes throughout on housing, repairs, living conditions, feeling safe, our responsiveness, funding, the handling of complaints, getting things right first time, listening and being proactive on issues raised by members of the public. And I do also know officers and councillors have spent time fixing big processes, big systems, and addressing competency, training, consultation, safety issues, fire safety, £600 million worth of capital investment, and millions in community grants, youth grants, and the Grenfell Recovery Programme. However, my early takeaway is there's still a gap between the two. On the ground, when people bump up against the council, things don't work the way that they should. In reality, any changes to structures and systems only really count when someone can just get something done well, on time, and with care and compassion. If there's a leak in the roof, it needs to be fixed quickly. If a person has a complaint, it needs to be addressed. If you want to pay a bill, it should be easy. If someone needs support, someone should be there to help. If you feel unsafe in your home or you need support, we should be there for you. You shouldn't need to know how to navigate our complex systems to get something done. It should be the same high quality, for every single person that comes into contact with us. We should know and understand the people we work for. A change in culture can only be underpinned by a real connection with people and knowing our customers, our residents. Mr. Mayor, it's a pivotal time. The inquiry report clearly outlines what went wrong and who is at fault. As I said in my open letter when the report was published 1 month ago, the inquiry laid bare the chain of events that led to the fire in 2017. It shows how residents were let down both by systems and people. It shows beyond doubt that this council failed the residents of Grenfell Tower and the 72 people, including 18 children, who died. On behalf of this council, I reiterate again tonight my apology unreservedly for our failure to listen to residents and to protect them. Put simply, we could and should have done more to keep people safe in their homes and care for our residents in the aftermath of the fire. The inquiry report is a guide, and our communities have given us the direction in which we need to go. And we are rightly being challenged about whether we can continue to deliver change and deliver an organisation that people want to see and interact with, an organisation that people can trust. Now, some will be sceptical, and I absolutely understand that. And this is not something I ever shy away from. Throughout my time as leader, I truly feel I have continued to ensure that the focus of this council has never wavered from what has happened in the past and in 2017. For me, understanding what happened in the past and why it happened is absolutely fundamental if we wish to continue to improve this council and improve what it's like to live in the borough. Mr. Mayor, as tonight has demonstrated, I am often asked about change. How much has the council done since 2017? And what difference does it really make to people's lives? It's a fair question. And there are days where I feel we've changed and days where I feel we haven't changed nearly enough. I have an extensive and an in-depth list of important changes we've made, many independently checked and assessed, and I could spend time going through them line by line right now. But I'm only satisfied when people really start to feel the change rather than just hear about it. Change is never linear. It can take place in areas that the public can see and feel, and in the areas where it's not always obvious. But it is always needed, and there are no excuses for us. We have to double down on what really counts for residents. Take the areas of culture and services that have improved and made them widespread. Seek not just pockets of learning and some better services, but make it consistent across every interaction the council has with people. And it's not just Grenfell in isolation. Nationwide challenges are on our doorstep. We see worsening areas of deprivation, an increase in vulnerable people on our streets, numbers rising in children's and adult support services, violent crime increasing in many places, and victims and perpetrators seemingly getting younger and younger. The cost of living is a difficult challenge for many, and financially, this organisation will have to save £40 million over the next 4 years. All these things are connected. People will be impacted, and we must be ready to be there for them. But these challenges also require us to work hard for, and more importantly, to work hard with our communities, and with humanity, with care, and with competency. We must meet the challenge of becoming the best council and apply the lessons from Grenfell to the increasing number of challenges we face now and in the future. Mr. Mayor, it's important to recognise that the inquiry report doesn't mark an end. Families have had to wait a long time for answers, and the publication is an important step forward in the ongoing search for justice. And I want to be clear once again. We fully accept the findings. This Council's role will never be diluted by the large number of companies and organisations involved. We failed to keep people safe before and during the refurbishment, and we failed to treat people with humanity and care in the aftermath. As a public authority, our primary concern should always be our residents and never our reputation, and that is the same today. Trust will take a very long time to rebuild, and in some cases will never be rebuilt. But this organisation owes it to every single person who lost their lives to continually learn the lessons, continually change, and continually improve. Thank you.
I now invite Councillor Ali to speak for up to 10 minutes. Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, may I first begin to pass my sincere condolences to my friend, Councillor Sinalari, and his family for the passing of his grandmother this morning, still attending the meeting with us. So my condolences to you and your family, Councillor Larry. Mr. Mayor, we represent our residents in the borough, both in the north and the south of the borough. And it's important to continue their voices are heard at this chamber. Therefore, it's been a year since I have been raising this issue once the residents asked me about the pressing issues that have been happening. And this meeting, I will be mainly concentrating on Grenfell, but I need to take these 2 points to add to make sure that our residents' voices are heard. It's about the conflict, it's ongoing, and the massacre, and the people dying in both sides and everywhere, in Middle East especially, and Gaza and Palestine, after Hamas attacked Israel and killed innocent civilians in Israel. But at the same time, Mr. Mayor, the death of 40,000 Palestinians and ongoing civilian death is unacceptable. And I and the local Labour councillors and the government, as has been said before, continue to call permanent ceasefire in the region and the release of the hostages so that they can return to their families. Mr. Mayor, the safety and security of our residents is a top priority of our councillors, and it should be for all councillors. As you may be well aware of, and I'm sure the leader knows, the latest knife crime in south of the borough has been difficult, dreadful in fact, and my prayers and thoughts are with the families who have suffered and who are still in hospital recovering. I wish them a speedy recovery, both in the south and in the north, and we hope to tackle this issue and unite for the knife crime, against knife crime, for all our residents to be safe, Mr. Mayor. Kensington and Chelsea RBKC residents made our council what it is today, and therefore I would like to thank them for what they have been doing, and especially when communities, some of us have been attacked for who they are because of our religion or because of the color of our skin, as it happened in the summer. British people have been attacked who are ethnically from Africa and from Asia because of who they are. And Mr. Mayor, I would like to thank over our community when they meet at Al-Mana Mosque this summer and to come together, and especially the councillors and the lead member, Councillor Sarah Addenbrook, for attending the mosque and speaking and supporting. So for that, we all unite against hate crime, and we will make sure this council and anywhere else will not be allowed to have a foot. Mr. Mayor, the long-awaited Grenfell inquiry report has now been published on the 4th of July, 4th of September, that is, and we have heard from our residents and the issues that this council and what's been happening 7 years on, Mr. Mayor. The disaster resulted 72 people, beloved members of our community, have lost their lives. They were seeking refuge in their homes. They were expecting to go have a good night's sleep. They were expecting to wake up the next day, Mr. Mayor. Perhaps they were planning to meet with their colleagues at work. Perhaps they were traveling. They were planning to travel to another city or another country. And perhaps the children were expecting to meet with their friends at school the next morning. However, that has been taken away by preventable disaster, a man-made disaster, Mr. Mayor. As I said before, I have witnessed, as a councillor, at the time I was not a councillor, but as an individual, as a human being, I have witnessed the tragedy, that unfortunate night of that disaster, as I remember very well, that man-made disaster, which was really, really awful. And to make it even worse, Mr. Mayor, the people who are responsible for the disaster are living in their normal lives, where the families that have been impacted and the surrounding communities impacted, the wider community, the local mostly, but the wider community in Kensington and Chelsea have been suffering. And people who have committed this atrocity are still free. That's unacceptable, Mr. Mayor. And once again, our community in Kensington and Chelsea are looking for who is responsible for this disaster and when justice will be served, Mr. Mayor. One would expect that this council will change after Grenfell disaster. However, the council has not changed, and although the council and the TMO are the main link between the former Grenfell Tower residents and the defendants, including the private companies mentioned in the inquiry, therefore the local communities would want to know who is responsible for the disaster and how long will they for justice. As members of our communities mentioned, justice delayed is justice denied. Sadly, RBKC, this council continues to care more about protecting its reputation and then dealing with or helping the residents and primary concerns. Therefore, we, the Labour Group of Councillors, will have continued to vote to make sure that the Grenfell Scrutiny Committee continued at the time. But after 2 years, Mr. Mayor, of the disaster, the council, the Conservative-led council, has made the decision, a political decision, to end the Grenfell Scrutiny Committee to avoid bereaved survivors and the local residents' participation of the scrutiny system, which we know which would have prevented or which could prevent a tragedy like Grenfell, like it happened before. We know in the inquiry has been mentioned before that the council's scrutiny system was not fit for purpose. Despite the protests from the bereaved survivors and the local residents, and despite the criticism from the Grenfell Task Force under the Paris scope, the decision was not reversed, Mr. Mayor. The decision to end the Grenfell Scrutiny Committee was one piece of evidence that the Conservative-led council, and they continued to lack the appetite to change and listen. Instead, the council wanted to, what we can actually think and what residents now can think of, is to forget that Grenfell has happened in this borough. The final inquiry report indicated that the council's scrutiny system failed, and the Grenfell disaster and the residents paid the ultimate price with the decision that has not been taken the right time. Another clear example, Mr. Mayor, that this council is not changed or not willing to change, and the leadership, although they may say good words to us and the individual when we speak to them or in public, the change, as has been said before, is action. Action speaks louder than words, Mr. Mayor, and that is what's required, and that's what has been missing for the last 7 years. Another clear example that the change has not happened at this council and protecting themselves and their interests, I would say, Mr. Mayor, is what happened in 2022 when the mayor of Kensington and Chelsea, who made a racial comment, in fact, a racist comment, and on official duty, he was supposed to be serving the whole communities, despite their colors, despite their religions, and that should be the case. However, the comments were only being exposed, when only being come to public and acknowledged publicly by the council when it's exposed in the media in 2024. It took 2 years to be acknowledged, Mr. Kaya. Is that a change? I'm definitely sure that it's not a change. Finally, Mr. Mayor, to the point that I want to make here is human beings can make mistakes. I, as a councillor, all the councillors have come across when councillors or individuals make racist and hatred comments. As been said, people have been disrespected, dehumanized, and that was the culture that has been happening in RBKC for all this time, not to be treated equally, just like maybe perhaps people have been seen because of their wealth, their estate, their different ways of life, their color of their skin, and that is an issue that we need to deal with. If the council is willing to really change, is to do that change, they should be working with all communities, they should be working with us as the opposition, because we are willing to get things right for this council to be a legacy of not just a Grenfell, to make sure that the council will change forever and there will be no disaster after this that we have gone through, Mr. Mayor. However, when people make mistakes, they have to pay the price on this. They have to face the consequence. For example, when a member of my then Labour Party members made racist comments and hatred, we've dealt with them. The Labour Party has taken the decision, and we've removed the whip. But the Conservative group has not done that. Why? That's the question. If you want to change, show the change by action, not just words, Mr. Mayor. And that is what we need to really grasp. Change happens in real life, in action, in policies, in actually when people can actually see what you're doing, rather than saying sorry. Sorry is not good enough at this time. Certainly when people have lost their lives and people have been dehumanized. Moving forward, Mr. Mayor, all of this have mentioned, moving forward, I would say Kensington and Chelsea Council leadership have failed to provide has failed to provide the basic services expected from a local authority, and I'm afraid will continue to do so, and the council leadership is not prepared to listen or learn from their mistakes. We as a Labour group of councillors, therefore calling the government to appoint a panel to oversee the council's service delivery to make sure a future Grenfell disaster will not happen in this borough or anywhere else, so that every council and the councillors can learn from the decisions that they make, Mr. Mayor. Finally, it's important to bring Grenfell scrutiny back. That is what's required. 5 committees have been divided into Grenfell Scrutiny Committee back. So when members of our bereaved survivors do come to the council meeting, they only speak here. But we had Grenfell Scrutiny Committee when everyone deals with it, but that is being dismantled. Why? Politically. And why we would like to know that. And if the council want to change, bring Grenfell Scrutiny back. And finally, Mr. Mayor, in the meantime, we are calling the council to make sure to work with local organizations, voluntary organizations, that actually fulfill the duty that this council, although I was not a member at the time, this council failed to do so. We failed to do so. We are at the council, although we were not a member at the time. You were not a member at the time. I would like to see local organizations be supported, local communities be supported, local areas be supported, and not to be imposed from others who really do not care about our communities. Many thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah. Before moving to item 7, I too would like to convey my sincere condolences to Councillor Lowry and on behalf of the whole chamber on the death of his grandmother this morning. Item number 7 is the Council's response to the Grenfell inquiry. Would Councillor Campbell propose and Councillor Taylor-Smith second the reception of the report?
I'd like to propose, sir.
And I'm happy to second, thank you.
Would Councillor Campbell now like to speak to the report?
I think I've spoken enough this evening. I think it's for other people to speak now.
I have indications that the following members wish to speak. Councillor McVeigh, Councillor Simmons, Councillor Rendell, Councillor Wade, Councillor Kamali, Councillor Dent-Code, Councillor Hammond, Councillor El Nahi, Councillor Folkes, Councillor Mona Ahmed, Councillor Addenbrook, Councillor Noor, Councillor Rossi, Councillor Benton, Councillor Wheel, Councillor Ali, Councillor Hargreaves, Councillor Thalasites, Councillor Will, and Councillor Taylor-Smith. Are there any other members? Councillor Bakhtiar as well. In that case, I'll invite Councillor McVeigh to speak for up to 5 minutes. Councillor McVeigh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I think you've read out pretty much all of the council chamber here tonight, I will try to be as brief as possible. But it is such an important debate, I do want to give it due importance. And I think, thank you to everyone who spoke tonight. I think it brought home the very individual, personal nature of that terrible tragedy, where no two experiences were the same. But what we did here tonight was there was some repetition in everybody's responses. We heard about dismissive culture and indifference to residences. Nabil said the change needs to come from within. And from Nahid, the unheeded, dismissive nature and no accountability. So there is the similarities there, which is very hard to hear still 7 years on. And just yesterday I had 2 separate meetings with different groups of residents. And in both these, the impact of the fire was still so raw and the trauma reverberating throughout their lives. And some mask it better than others, but you just scratch the surface and it's there. And I think it really is heartbreaking. As Elizabeth has said, we have rightly apologised and we've acknowledged our role in this tragedy. And we have been making amends and we will continue to make amends. As many of you know, Grenfell is very close to my heart. I live within 500 metres of the tower and I was involved as a volunteer in the community response through my local charity Rugby Portobello in the days, weeks and months after the fire. And I saw firsthand the terrible, life-shattering grief, the disbelief, the confusion, the shock. But I also saw the incredible fortitude and dignity and neighbours helping neighbours. As Samia said, the community was not divided. The community came together, all different parts of the community came together. And I did see individual council officers there doing all they could to help. But as the inquiry report says, and it's correct, the coordination by the council was missing. There was no central structure. And I know that the council's worked really hard on this under Maxine, and our resilience is now as it should be. And we have round-the-clock officers assigned 24/7 with clear chains of command and clear knowledge about when they need to ask for help from the rest of London. So, housing. I'm here standing up with my housing group. And the council and the TMO failed in its most fundamental duty of a council, to keep residents safe. We did not ask the right questions. We were not curious enough. We failed to listen to the residents when they were concerned about the building works. As Ed said in his statement earlier, residents must be stakeholders in their own homes. And this is something we need to do more of, and this is something we have to get right. And the process of change in the council is ongoing. We all need to be accessible. We all need to listen and to act on what our residents say. And I know everyone in this chamber here as ward councillors will be involved in their local communities. And in my role as in charge of housing, I've been visiting our estates and meeting with residents, because I think the only way to really understand is to be there and to listen and to see firsthand. When we first took over the homes, they were in a terrible state, and so we have an extensive major works programme to address this. And the priorities are absolutely safety first. And we have to focus on not just getting this right, but it's how we get it right. It's how we engage with residents. And it's how, when we do our repairs, how our operators are with residents, our operatives are with residents. And I know that the housing management has been doing a lot of heart-to-heart training, which social workers use. So we still get things wrong, and I'm sorry, we must go further. And when we get things wrong, we need to acknowledge it, act on it, and put it right. And we're all here in this council chamber because we do want to make a difference. We want to make a difference to our residents' lives. And on reading the inquiry, we must be absolutely steadfast in that commitment to make those differences to all the residents, all our residents in our borough. Thank you.
Councillor Simmons, I invite you to speak for up to 5 minutes. Councillor Simmons.
Thank you. I wish to, first of all, reiterate the contents of my first speech at full council as a member of the public back in 2018, as it is sadly still relevant. I will be supplying the text to be appended here. For now, I will be speaking about the culture of this council and about accountability, or rather, the impunity that this leadership enjoys, and which I believe is at the heart of many of the criticisms in the inquiry report. The report talks about the TMO and about the immediate aftermath. Sadly, too many of these criticisms are still applicable today, some 7 years on. It is difficult to bring about change in any organisation if its heads are perpetrators of the behaviour in question. Any council can only be as good as its leadership and the decisions it makes. An apology without any sign of contrition, no change in behaviour, nor apparently any capacity for self-reflection is just a word. You're asking, why did the council fail? It may sound harsh, but in my opinion, the leadership could take a look in the mirror, because it is at the leadership level where some of the worst aspects of the toxic culture of contempt, prejudice and discrimination and entitled impunity reside. I believe that almost everything else follows from this. This council's deep-seated contempt for minority councillors and by extension our constituents has been made abundantly clear over the last 7 years, including quite openly in this chamber. No regard or respect has been paid to the fact that you all know perfectly well that North Kensington councillors are ourselves members of the immediate community, that we witnessed the fire, that our community was devastated, and that we too are traumatised. Let alone the fact that we are the democratically elected representatives of our wards. This isn't a game, this is our democracy and the lives of our residents we are talking about. So can I expect cries of rubbish from the Deputy Leader in response to statements of fact in representation of my constituents? Will my speech be dismissed or belittled by the Deputy Leader as emotional? Or will it be minuted as Councillor Simmons also spoke? More to the point, will what I have to say on behalf of my constituents make a blind bit of difference towards improving matters? It hasn't so far. Too often it has felt like talking to a brick wall. Councillor Campbell has expressed her own view in this very chamber that there is no point in continuing a conversation when the other party is not listening. Well, the ball is in her court. It's not enough just to talk the talk. With regard to the brutal exclusion and neglect of the immediate community for 5 years following the fire, a cohort where there were secondary deaths, a senior officer of the council admitted in 2018 that this was coming from leadership. When we speak of accountability, there needs to be accountability for the pain and distress that this decision caused to an already traumatised and suffering community. After the council election in 2018, Councillor Campbell stated proudly that the residents had returned a Conservative majority to the council, as if that somehow absolved them, while omitting to acknowledge or understand the fact that her leadership has and still has no mandate or accountability whatsoever in North Kensington. Both the leader and the deputy leader have on separate occasions in the last 7 years told the Grenfell community, I am accountable to you. If you don't like what I do, you can vote me out. So when residents complain of the gaslighting, as we heard on Monday evening, they are right, and it comes from the top. It's insulting and it's harmful, and it needs to stop. Residents on Monday also expressed doubt as to whether this council is capable of changing. I believe only the leadership can answer that. It is the culture of leadership that I believe needs to change. We need to name it the culture of contempt, of impunity, of favouritism, of intimidation and coercion. The smugness that comes from that impunity and the spitefulness that comes when that impunity is challenged. There is no speech that I could give in 5 minutes or 5 hours that would adequately convey or do justice to the pain and grief and suffering and mental anguish that this council has inflicted on the Grenfell community since the disaster. I could list some of the cruel, inhumane, self-serving, degrading, dishonest and spiteful things this council has done to the Grenfell community in the last 7 years, but it would take too long. There are just too many examples. But the last 7 years have been made so much harder by the actions of this council. It has been a whole additional layer of trauma and pain on top of the trauma and pain of Grenfell itself. And if it were the case that RBKC, using the methods of TMO, caused division, weaponised its partners, including the NHS, against members of the community in the service of parties subject to the public inquiry and criminal prosecutions, then there are serious questions to answer. The health and well-being of the Grenfell community...
Sorry, Councillor Simmons, could you please conclude?
I'll conclude it there then, thank you.
I now call upon Councillor Rendell to speak for up to 5 minutes. Councillor Rendell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'd just like to obviously take this time to thank everyone who were our speakers this evening. I think many of the speakers, especially, I would pick a few out that Safia, Edward, Nabil, of course, and Nahid. I think that they're one of the best and most eloquent speeches I think this chamber has heard in a very, very long time. And I think even for councillors, they summed it up in a way that the community can express. And I just want to thank them for their time. I know it takes a lot to come out to speak in front of a large group of people, but I think their contributions have been tremendously helpful this evening, and I'd just like to thank them for taking their time to do that. And I think it also exposes where this council has failed and still is failing in many circumstances. And I'd like to thank them for that as well, and including their advocacy on certain subjects as well. And I really appreciate you coming here tonight, everyone. Reading the inquiry report, I won't go over it. Many residents have said it tonight, and those affected, they knew what was already in there. And I think that is the case for a lot of people and a lot of members here as well. The council failed monumentally in every single element of that night. It had a complete disregard for people's views. I think we heard tonight that, that it, in some circumstances, still remains. And it was a failure to protect people. Now, as councillors, we are residents ourselves. We represent residents on this organisation to ensure the bureaucracy works in a way that it's meant to. And it didn't. The bureaucracy didn't work, but also members didn't scrutinise the bureaucracy in order to work properly. And that comes out clearly in the report, especially the council's relationship with the TMO, which was perhaps too close. It was meant to be for comfort. It didn't scrutinise building control. It didn't scrutinise fire safety. And the council wasn't accountable. And that is something that I think is awful and haunting and terrible and must be not repeated in any way it can. I think members so far tonight have also laid out bare where there are still failures, where we still need to make changes. I think Councillor Campbell summed that up, Councillor Simmons as well referred that to in her speech too, and how we can do that better. We've heard where we're still failing as a local authority. For people on the walkways, and I think Councillor Simmons' helpful intervention at the leadership team meeting the other week was very, very important on that. The residents who came to that meeting as well, Mr. Mayor, still really ensure that we did get this right. And I said, we're still not getting it right. I mean, it's true, change, we need to change. Change is hard. I found change in the positions I've been very, very difficult because you want to do these amazing things as an individual. And sometimes, as I said, the bureaucracy of the council doesn't always agree with you, even as councillors. And I think many members across the council can agree with that. And how can we pierce that veil, Mr. Mayor? How can we pierce that veil as representatives of the people that we serve? Because we are not employees of the council. We are not part of the body corporate necessarily, but we are here to ensure that our residents get the voices heard internally so these changes can happen. And I think we need to really take away, double our efforts, and reflect on what we can do as an organisation, what we can do as servants of the people to ensure that that happens. And I think obviously tonight is a major turning point of that. I mean, it's been 7 years, I do realise that. But how can we take this forward, including next month when the council will recommend our response to the inquiry report, how these will be taken on board, what changes will come from that, and how we can move forward better together, but hopefully for a better future as well after this tragedy, which should never have happened in the first place, but will ensure that everyone has a say and a view on what we can do as a local authority. I'll leave it there, Mr. Mayor. I'm conscious I'm almost out of time. Thank you.
I now invite Councillor Wade to speak for up to 5 minutes. Councillor Wade.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was on the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee for several years before the fire. Cross-examination of Robert Black was considered to be vexatious, and we never got the answers that we needed. The issue of compartmentalisation, door closers, and in particular the ASB problems related to the operation of the fire alarm system were raised at several meetings. This was a time when Ed and the Grenfell Tower Residents Group were routinely sending information to councillors detailing their concerns, highlighting the fire risks within the building. A time when there were 72 insurance claims submitted by residents of the tower to the council for damage caused to large white goods, which coincided with the upgrade of the electrics. Grenfell Tower was owned by the borough. The tenants paid rent to the borough, and it was clear that the TMO was not fit for purpose. This was apart from the routine problems about neglect, maintenance and management of council housing stock in general, and highlighted historic failures that gave rise to organisational complacency. There would be questions raised and responses provided, but they lacked detail and outcomes. Information about the cladding or other elements of the refurbishment were not included in reports about the project to the committee. This calls into question the efficacy of the scrutiny process and the transparency of information sharing with committee members and councillors. It is still unclear as to why there was no effective monitoring of the TMO and its management. The borough should have identified that the organisation failed to protect residents or manage and maintain their properties that they were responsible for. The TMO was a frustrating organisation to deal with, whether it was the failure of their accounting system, whether it was undertaking repairs in a timely manner, and how they did their tendering and actually on-the-ground management. There was a lack of response to direct questions. There was a lack of timely manner to people's repairs. But when an organisation like the Grenville Tower residents were sending emails every single month, we're telling people there was total transparency as to what their problem was. So why didn't we listen? The TMO felt they were too big for failure. They were patronising and therefore responses derisory. Every resident of this borough should have equal standing, irrespective of tenure, creed or colour, and that is where we failed as a council to comprehend the daily challenges that many of our residents face and address their problems. We state that we're fairer, but does that include caring? There are questions that still require answers. I understand that the Contingency Risk Assessment Department was disbanded and subsumed into another department. If so, why? Why was there no revised risk assessment undertaken on the building on the completion of works? If it was done, it was clearly not sufficient or appropriate. And the consequences. How has the fire impacted on the finances of the borough to create new homes and upgrade existing homes? This tragedy has many components, many opportunities missed, and everyone played a role. The long-term impacts on North Kensington residents are incalculable, and this requires long-term planning and strategies for those who need ongoing support and help. In conclusion, I remain haunted by the children with no future, the parents and the families dislocated, grieving and still without justice. We did fail, and one way to move forward is that there's transparency in information sharing to committee members and councillors so that there is a robust process of checks and balances and considerably better regard to the matter of scrutiny. Thank you.
I now invite Councillor Kamali to speak for up to 5 minutes. Councillor Kamali.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. In preparation for tonight, I wasn't really sure what to do. I didn't know whether to write a speech, to make notes, or really just to have a bit of a think. And really, it was hearing the testimony tonight that I was able to sort of put some words together. The one that really struck me from what we heard this evening, and there were many words, there was accountability, transparency, change, community, but the one that really hit home is that avoidable. These deaths were avoidable. And we have to come into this place every day to make sure that we never are put in that place where deaths are avoided. We should not have deaths in our borough in this way. If they are avoidable, they must be avoided, and we have to work day in and day out to make sure that this council is turning over every rock, looking at every piece of paper, checking every regulation to make sure that we are avoiding those deaths, to make sure that we are not putting people in this situation so that we do not have bereaved and survivors in this borough. We have to continue to fight for change. We have to define what change is. For everyone, it will be something a little bit different, but we have to continue to come here every day to try and work to make change for those people that came tonight to tell us that they're not seeing it, they're not feeling it. We have to make sure that in the months and years ahead, that they do see it and they do feel it, whether that's a simple interaction of booking a repair, whether it's renewing a permit, or whether it's far more profound and it's within the body that stands here before you, the people that sit here. They have to feel that we have changed and that we do represent them and that we're fighting for them. It's really, really difficult to be in this council at all of these times, because on the night, I wasn't here, I wasn't in Kensington, it was in the borough, but I wasn't at the fire. I watched it like many of our residents would have done on television, and it was a grotesque piece of news. That's how it was presented on the BBC. It was news, horrible news, disturbing news, and that's how they described it. This was an event that was happening in London, a place where we probably have all lived, grown up, spent our time, our home, and it was the sense that this could happen in Kensington and Chelsea, a place where I have grown up my whole life, and a profound sense of shame that this was happening, not just in London, in the UK, and what's meant to be an advanced economy with sensible rules and regulations, but in a place where I lived, hundreds of, few kilometers from my home. An incredible shame, and that's a shame that we will all have, that it could have happened, that it was avoidable, that we all have to live with, however close we were or far away from the tragedy on the night. But we have to wear that shame when we come here to try and affect change and to make things better for our residents. And it's a shame that we should wear slightly with, pride is the wrong word, but we should continue to wear it with that feeling that it's a weight that we will always bear with us for as long as we're here working for our residents. So it's a horrible feeling, but it is a feeling that we should continue to carry with us. And that's something I'm determined that we will work to improve, so that that load is that little bit lighter, but never entirely relieved from our shoulders. So thank you, and thank you to everybody that came here this evening. Thank you.
And I invite Councillor Dent-Code to speak for up to 5 minutes. Councillor Dent-Code.
Mr. Mayor, there aren't enough hours in the day for me to say everything I feel about the inquiry final report and what the Council's implications paper sets out. Having attended the public meeting at Morley College on Monday, it's clear that many residents feel the same. While the Council looks inwards at itself and its management and processes, residents simply want to get the service they're paying for and deserve. They want phones answered, emails responded to, repairs completed. They want homes that fit their family without damp and mould, their rubbish taken away to avoid pests, schools funded, children fed. They want to be safe. They want respect, courtesy and dignity. Let us look for a moment at the trajectory of Notting Dale Ward. It was never on the top 10 list of shame for multi-deprivation before 2017. Now it is. Unfortunately, we still don't have ward profiles updated since the census in 2021. All our neighbouring boroughs have done this. So please analyse the Notting Dale ward profile when it's published in 3 weeks. Funding priorities should address specific needs. We do know, however, that the physical and mental health is failing and life expectancy is dropping. The unemployment rate is almost double that for the rest of the borough, and that must be due in part to the highest rate of long-term ill health and of adult emergency admissions to hospital, with the worst rate of heart attacks and COPD in the borough. Child poverty is rising, and the eight busy food banks in the ward evidence that, along with a baby bank for families who cannot even afford to feed or clothe their babies. How has this happened? The council has spent hundreds of millions of pounds on so-called recovery. Will we ever get the true cost, I wonder? I've been looking. I found around $750 million spent on corporate funding that I guess imagine includes staff and legal costs and on so-called recovery. And if you count the funds spent on rehousing survivors, that could be well over £1 billion spent on Nottingdale residents and former residents to date. Our friends and neighbours in Nottingdale are getting poorer and sicker, and so are their children. What has the money been spent on, and why has it so spectacularly failed to improve the lives of Nottingdale people? Could it be that those in elected positions of power in the council, those decision makers who've always outnumbered us and imagine always will, who live in the least deprived areas of the borough, do not understand the needs of those in the most deprived? The questions we've heard tonight, the comments that arose on Monday, and on so many, many meetings in the past 7 years, come from a community that feels it has no agency. I recently received an email from the council about a so-called consultation. It asked for residents to share ideas so the council could harness their creativity. Not a deliberate choice of words, I imagine, but just so very revealing and indicative of the council's attitude towards residents, who it seems need to be harnessed. Despite endless meetings, no meaningful power has ever been handed over. Budgets are cut, and what is left must be fought over by endless rounds of applications, bids, competitions, city living, etc., etc. It is the Hunger Games of local politics. So turning to the 10 questions that the council has posed to itself, they're all entirely self-referential, inward-looking. They're like the inevitable painful torment at the end of a one-sided relationship breakup. I can change. Tell me how to change. I'll be whatever you want me to be. So here are some alternatives. Stop saying you're sorry. No one believes you anymore. Stop saying you can change. After 7 years, no one believes you. Stop lionising the communities who stepped into the gaping void to deliver the help and unconditional love the council did not even recognise it owes us. Step outside your downward spiral of self-flagellation and try some basic humanity, along with allowing your competent officers, of which there are many, to take the lead. And if you can't, and I'm addressing elected members here, please resign. 7 years of failure is 7 years too many. We've suffered enough. Thank you.
I invite Councillor Hammond to speak for up to 5 minutes. Councillor Hammond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. When I was in the Royal Air Force, I read quite a lot of rather too many aircraft accident reports, quite a lot of them fatal, and quite a few of them people I knew. And if there was one common aspect to these reports, it is that there was never one individual cause for these accidents, but rather an unlucky combination of different things which lined up on that particular day to make a situation unrecoverable. As we would say, it's the holes in the Swiss cheese lining up. And so it is with the Grenfell inquiry, or the Grenfell disaster, as the inquiry report, the very thorough report, makes clear. And as I said in the OSC meeting when we discussed it, the executive summary of the report, which we were all given, and the council's summary of the extracts that we've been given tonight make very painful reading, both about the failings of our predecessors in this council and those failings of other organisations as well. And this report that we're looking at tonight, it feels to me like the first part of a report, because it is the first part of a report. It's trying to analyse what are and set out all the different areas of failings. And I think what we need to know out of that in the second half of the report is what are the areas of failings that we have addressed? What are the surprises out of this report, if any, that we've got? Are there any gaps that have not been addressed? And if there are, what's the plan and the timeline to address those? And I've got three examples that sprang to my mind, which I set out in the OSC. The TMO, clearly it's a unique organisation which failed. but the council uses other third-party organisations to deliver services across the board. So I will be looking to get some assurances that our scrutiny of the delivery of those services today are effective and that those services are delivered in a safe way. I will want to know whether building control is now effective and safe, and I did get some verbal assurances for that at the OSC, but I think we'll need to see that set out in the next version of the report in November. And I will want to get some assurance again in the next version of the report that the Council's resilience has improved and that we won't have an immediate response as poor as the one that was shown on the 14th of June 2017 in its immediate aftermath. And I know we had some assurance from the Chief Executive at the OSC meeting a couple of weeks ago and from the leader tonight, and Councillor McVeigh referred to that as well, that those things sound like they may be on track. I mean, those are areas of competence that I think we want to be setting out. As the Chief Executive quite rightly pointed out at the Overview Scrutiny Committee, underlying all of these is the culture of the Council. That's probably not something that lends itself to words in a report, but it underlies everything. And culture is, organisational culture is only ever a work in progress, and it's something that we will have to carry on working on for as long as all of us individually and collectively are in this place. It's never a finished business. So I've set out what I'm looking for in the next report, and I look forward to seeing that and contributing to the discussions on that in the coming weeks. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And I invite Councillor El Nahi to speak for up to 5 minutes. Councillor El Nahi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and a very good evening. It is a very long-waited for this to receive this report. 1,700 pages, several chapters into different themes. And what struck me more is this quote. I've skimmed through it, and I've asked for help, to be honest, to analyze the complexity of some of those findings, which I reached out to some of my colleagues at Brunel University to help me to understand, because I reached out to the council and they said to me, what kind of help you need? Okay, I don't know. I just need to comprehend and represent and help my community. As Councillor Kamali said, he did not witness the event that night. When I see that event, when it's mentioned, where I pass by Grenfell Tower every day, whether going to the Kensington Leisure Centre, going to Latimer Road Station, having visitors coming around, to understand the complexity, the traumatic effects, what our community are facing, and you've seen some samples of some of their stories being shared with us. It's only the tip of the iceberg. The pain, honestly, every time I go through that, and when I look at that tower, I remember that 14th of June, that after midnight, I was just coming from visiting my daughter. It was a very beautiful evening, and when I heard the scream coming home, I just rushed across the road, and I saw the fire just starting. Within half an hour, it was like an inferno. And that image, I wish I can just take it out of my memory. And all what our residents are asking for is just respect, which is not much to do. We talk about change of culture, organizational change, looking at processes. We forget our humanity. 18 18 children, their life being taken away from them. However, when I see some of our young people who've been through that trauma, going to UCL, going to Imperial College. I've just heard from one of my residents. He's done a degree at Queen Mary. Now he's going to Imperial College. We have great achievers, our population. I will not accept that we are a deprived community with deprived talent. During my work as a councillor, soon after I've been elected, I've seen talent in our garages where we've been invited in 2018 to visit that garage in my ward in Nottingdale with fantastic achievement, electronic conversion for Beetle into electric vehicle. No support. He suffered as one example of local business, where I put him in touch immediately with the electrical engineering at Brunel University. And they work. Another groups emerged, and this is where the report emphasized communities getting together to support each other. So the legacy of this council, we have great officers here. I've just walked through Nottingdale ward, which is a ward in Kensington. It's the Royal Borough of Kensington, Chelsea. That officer, which I have a great respect for, he walked with me 1 hour in Nottingdale. I called to the leadership, come and see Nottingdale. Is it a top priority? We have a strategy. We paid a lot, consultants, to look at our strategy. Greener, fairer, safer borough. I don't know, maybe I mixed the different terminology here. I don't know the sequence, doesn't matter. We have talent in our area, so I called to the council, go back to the, and there is a call, I will finish off here, Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for, but one thing I call for, just give us respect as elected members and work with us to provide this legacy for recovery and reinstate Grenfell Recovery Scrutiny Committee. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Now call upon Councillor Folkes to speak for up to 5 minutes. Councillor Folkes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, my condolences to Councillor Lowry. I'm very sorry to hear about your loss today. I also wanted to join my colleagues in thanking everybody who came to speak tonight. It was incredibly powerful to listen to them. They were brave, they were honest, and they were incredibly dignified in what they said. And they were very informative, as my colleagues have said, of all the things that we need to notice, all the things that we need to change. And we absolutely take that on board and want to do everything that they have instructed us and hope that we will do. It was very painful. And I want to use Sophia's words. And she said, the pain, hurt, grief, anger, and betrayal that she felt, I think everyone felt. Everyone in that community. I think everyone in this room feels that for that community. And we are really, really and truly sorry that they have had to go through this. Thank you, Marwan, for bringing up the children and the young people and talent. You're absolutely right to say that. And for me personally, part of the heartbreak is those 18 young people who have lost their opportunities and their chances to reach all those things that they could have had in their future. It's an absolute tragedy for them. And it's a tragedy for all those families that have lost those children, because that trauma and that loss will stay for them forever and in that community, and the ripples and reverberations will go on for generations to come. And it's just heartbreaking for all of us to think about that. But you're right, what we have to do in the small ways, and somehow I feel it is small, is to say there is a future There's a future for that community. There's a future for those young people. And that's what we're here to provide for them. And therefore, in my current role in Family and Children's Services, I'm listening to those young people. I'm asking them to help to deliver what services we can for those young people. I'm asking them to help work and design what will be for our youth council services and grants that we give them. They're helping us design the future for Grenfell services. They're helping their voice in our young people strategy. And everything that we are doing and designing for young people will have the voice of those young people in it. And that is really important. And I think that will be one small thing that can show, hopefully, how we have changed and how we are listening. And we still need to prove that, but I hope we can use that as a legacy for us to say. And just briefly, I was there on the day. I lived just around the corner in Ladbroke Grove, and like you, Marwan, it is seared on my memory, but the trauma for me is so minuscule compared to the trauma for everyone else that was there. And as Jem said, it was a news event. There were news cameras, there were reporters, there were satellites. There were so many people there that weren't really thinking about what was going on, but was thinking about reporting that to the world outside. And for us that were there, and there were councillors there, and there were council officers there, it was the chaos and the confusion, and you know, I think we just all felt really impotent. And I still feel that shame, that hopelessness, that on the day I didn't have the capacity to know who I should ring, who I should call, where we should go to. And I also want to thank those incredible community organisations, Rugby Portobello, the Harrow Club, the churches, Clement James, St Francis, Almanar. They were completely astonishing. And we went round and visited them, and we learnt from them. We learnt from them what to do. We learnt from them how to direct people to those services. And they helped support us, which was the wrong way around, but they were amazing. And we will continue to learn from them and listen to them as to how we can do better in the future. And so I'll leave it with that, and to say that we will only learn if we listen to the community and everyone else. Thank you.
I now invite Councillor Ahmed to speak for up to 5 minutes. Councillor Ahmed.
Thank you. So this is quite personal to me, not just because I was there on the night, as many of the people in this room were, or because I live by the site where 72 people lost their lives in one of the starkest examples of social murder that I can think of. But because I once lived in the tower myself, it's not something I've mentioned before in this room, but I lived on the highest floor in flat 201. So whenever 12-year-old Jessica Ramirez's name is read out at meetings or anniversaries, I know that she died in a home that was once mine. What we know now from the inquiry report is that the nature and the seriousness of the council's failings, which resulted in the fire, and then the continued failure in the 7 years since for adequate measurable changes to happen, means that this organisation has lost the right to scrutinise itself or the right to hold itself to account internally. That just hasn't worked. We've had 7 years of promises and commitments to change, but the reality is that 62% of residents reported in the Grenfell Legacy conversation 2 years ago that they do not feel that the council has changed or has in fact changed for the worse, a message which was heard again loud and clear at the public meeting on Monday. 7 years of promises which the immediate community are telling us loud and clear have not materialised and has served to reinforce the already dire mistrust the community has in the council. A resident on Monday said quite powerfully that those who perpetrated the failings that led to the fire cannot be trusted to govern over their own victims. The only way to overcome the legacy of mistrust is through independent external scrutiny, so that whatever the commitments made in November or changes adopted in light of the inquiry report and the Grenfell future consultations, there will be independent external scrutiny of how these are going to be implemented and evidenced. Those days of hoping to hear reassurances that were mentioned a moment ago by Councillor Hammond, who just walked out, that hoping to hear of reassurances that things are in place at a scrutiny meeting, that's gone. That's simply not good enough anymore. The immediate Grenfell community has suffered enough from empty promises, and the messages from residents during the Grenfell Future Support consultations is that since the disbanding of the Grenfell Recovery Scrutiny Committee, there are no reliable formal accountability mechanisms. The lack of a sizable opposition from the minority parties also means that the right to challenge also can't come reliably enough from this side of the chamber, as the imbalance of power between the council leadership and its opposition, as it is with its residents, is just too great. So these functions have to come externally. On Monday, residents living in the immediate community spoke of experiencing the same levels of contempt in their interaction with officers when it came to issues around housing complaints as the residents of Grenfell in the lead up to the fire. That the very same failures of the council in their oversight and monitoring of the TMO and outsourcing of responsibility is being replicated in their management of external contractors and with those left languishing for years in temporary accommodation. This was again echoed in the consultations by the external scrutiny team, who reported that the lack of care and respect, which was a key contributory cause of the fire, is not something that residents believe has changed or even can change. And there are failings which are much broader. I don't have 5 minutes is just not enough time for this. I mean, just simply, 7 years ago, something that has continued to worsen, most notably when is population health in our wards. The lives of residents in Nottingdale are being cut short because of avoidable and systematic differences in their social circumstances. Why is it that a woman in Queensgate will have 18 more years of life than a woman in Nottingdale? And in the Grenfell Joint Strategic Needs Assessment, Kensington and Chelsea Council is still named as one of the 2 London councils where the life expectancy gap is worsening rather than getting any better. We need to know as a matter of urgency what the council will do to rectify this, and because what has happened before is not working. I also want to ask specifically, as 3 of the speakers did earlier, including Safia, and you, Dr. Campbell, failed to address in your response, to ask what the council, Councillor Campbell, to ask what the council will be doing to review and interrogate the racist and, as specifically named in the report, Islamophobic attitudes evident 7 years ago, and which, according to the report, characterised the treatment of some of the residents in the immediate aftermath of the fire. How are you going to examine for this now, and what mechanisms are going to be used to evidence to the diverse population in Nottingdale and North Kensington that this has been rooted out? And rooted out now, not in time for coming elections. The Council also previously committed to publishing an annual review of progress regarding the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Strategy, which was promised following the fire. This hasn't happened, and it needs to be urgently addressed. No, I'm going to finish. There is a huge disparity between how this council and its Conservative leadership regards itself and how it's viewed by its residents in the north of the borough, and just not enough curiosity as to why that might be. My experience over the past 2 years, not always, and not from those within the Grenfell Partnerships team, is that this can be a very closed culture, with a leadership that can at times, not always, be defensive and intolerant of challenge, something that was echoed in the comments about the culture of secrecy and concealment that exists in the interests of self-preservation by one of the speakers earlier. As outlined in the scrutiny report on the future Grenfell consultations, this defensiveness, when it comes to hearing from residents, has meant that the space for the experience and feedback of residents to be heard and to influence change does not exist or isn't available consistently enough. There therefore has to be more embedded participatory approaches in the council to enable residents to influence the changes they want. Residents have lost all faith in the usual consultation processes, which their experience has shown them is not effective. And there needs to be a move away from one-off consultations on specific questions and more open-ended engagement with leadership and cabinet members, and having those individuals more visible in our community. At the meeting on Monday, Councillor Benton asked, what do we mean by culture? This nebulous thing, how do we measure it?
I mean, there's plenty that I can say about that, but to cut it short, the fact is that culture is set by its leadership in part, and there will be no capacity for cultural change whilst those who were in leadership positions at the material time, both before and in the immediate aftermath of the fire, hold leadership positions now. Thank you.
I now call upon Councillor Addenbrooke to speak for up to 5 minutes. Councillor Addenbrooke.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, my microphone's not working. Some may say that is a good thing, but... So the inquiry report and what we've heard tonight has highlighted how we failed our residents and how they felt abandoned by the council in the immediate aftermath, and still do. When Anne and I went to the Westway in the morning, the magnitude of what had happened was overwhelming. And we witnessed firsthand how the voluntary sector and the faith organisations stepped in immediately to support those affected. So I would really like to thank them again for all they did and continue to do for our communities. The fact that we live in one of the most diverse boroughs should be a strength. But the reality is, this council lacked cultural competency in understanding our residents' needs, and I can only apologise for that. Mr. Mayor, this is not about politics. We are here to serve and do the best for our residents and not ourselves, to work with and not do to, and we must not forget that. So I just want to reconfirm our commitment to learn from our failings, whether it's through continuing to fund different community organisations so we strengthen our resilience through the VCS, and most importantly, spending more time in our communities so we understand and celebrate our diverse borough and serve all our residents, and especially those that need our services most. So thank you to everyone that came this evening. I don't know whether you're still here, but it was a really good reminder that we must change, and the lessons that have been learned must not be lost, and a changed council would be a fitting legacy from Grenfell. Thank you.
I now call upon Councillor Noor to speak for up to 5 minutes. Councillor Noor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Grenfell disaster is not an easy topic for me to talk. The day it happened, I was not a councillor, I was a community worker. Mr. Mayor, since June 2017, the council leadership has expressed deep regret and promised real change and a willingness to listen and act upon community concerns. These promises have not been felt on the ground. The inquiry has clearly said all the organizations and companies bear responsibility of what happened on Grenfell Day. It also reported say that they have all contributed in one way or another the tragedy and contributing the most failings and incompetence, but some of them had also dishonesty and greed. Mr. Mayor, Royal Borough Council Chelsea could have done more to listen to all our diverse communities from different backgrounds, in particular those residents who are Muslim background who were observing Ramadan the time the tragedy took place. For many, the only resource of support was the local volunteer sector, which moved in within minutes, not hours, of the fire taking place. The local authorities did work with the volunteer sector, but I believe personally being there from the night 12 o'clock till next day, the whole community coming together, and the old centers have been mentioned, like Harrow Club, Westway, Rago Portobello, Almanar, has served the community, people coming from across London, not only in Castle and Chelsea. Mr. Mayor, I heard and witnessed there was a little or no consideration given to the value that local community deserves. The council could have provided a bit more support before the fire and after the fire, and have a better understanding of our community, whole in Castle and Chelsea, in particular, and North Kensington. The large organizations did not have the understanding and the need of our community, but the grassroots organizations, which I've worked for quite a long time before I became a councillor, do understand the needs of our community. Our response will be inadequate unless we listen to the views and concerns of our residents, and their feedback and comments will need to form part of the council response. I lastly want to thank all those residents who come to this evening, who have expressed their experiences and concerns. We share that feeling. Thank you very much.
I now invite Councillor Rossi to speak for up to 5 minutes. Councillor Rossi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I will also start by thanking all the people who came in and spoke to us this evening. I found their contributions very poignant and moving. So the Grenfell Tower fire on the 14th of June 2017, we've heard from the bereaved and survivors today, for whom the experience is still raw. It is a constant pain which must be endured. None of us here in this council chamber will forget the Grenfell fire tragedy, even though we experienced it differently. It is an indelible stain on this council. It has defined this council, and its aftermath has redefined the way we interact with our residents. A lot has been said about change tonight and the need to change. And I agree with Nabil Choucher here that change must start with the individual looking inwardly. Change hurts because it means facing up to unpleasant truths about ourselves. Change is a process, and I totally accept that as an institution, we have not changed enough. In the first council meeting after the fire in July 2017, when residents, the bereaved and survivors filled this chamber, I was the mayor. This meeting had a profound effect on me, and I was struck then, as I am today, by the dignified resilience of all those concerned in the tragedy. But when you're the mayor, you don't get to say what you really think, so I will say it now. I am haunted by the events of that night. I am racked by a sense of guilt and shame that this fire took place in our building on our watch. I am deeply sorry that it happened, and not a day goes by when I don't think about that night. I have listened to much of the Grenfell inquiry online, and I make myself read the reports, though I find it difficult reading. This council has failed its residents. However, I know that there are councillors and officers here who are working to make amends, and I know that even if we have not achieved it yet, there is a real commitment to improving the way we work for our residents. The Grenfell Tower fire has defined my time on the council, and it is the reason that I am still here. I will never forget that night, because I cannot. I understand the need for justice, but tonight is a night that we should basically apologise to our residents again for everything that they went through. Thank you.
I call now upon Councillor Benton to speak for up to 5 minutes. Councillor Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, I would like to say that the event mentioned by Councillor Ali earlier, involving our former mayor, which I don't want to go into any more detail of, I will also just make another point on that, which is that it's in clear violation of the Hillsborough Charter, which this council has committed to implement, and it does show where this council's priorities lie. I'll also say that the council continues to demonstrate its failure to follow the commitments in the Charter of Public Participation through its engagement with residents, particularly in its failure to commit to co-design and taking the steer from residents on a number of major works as promised through the Charter. For example, the attempt to vandalise Trellick Tower and the Cheltenham Estate without any consent of residents or any attempt to co-design. If the leadership team of this council wants to genuinely demonstrate its commitment to change, it can start with throwing out the plans to build monstrosities on Kensal Canal side with under 14% social housing. That number is not getting any larger. Against the wishes of all local RAs, amenity societies, and a vast majority of residents. If they want to commit to change, they can also start by committing to protect Canalside House, a building used by dozens of our most needed voluntary sector organisations, from demolition. If the council at the very least cannot commit to this, then this council demonstrates a continued failure to adhere to its own policies and an ongoing contempt for the people it has promised to serve, including the bereaved and survivors. I'd like to say something about the word gaslighting, which I'm often quite cynical about deploying. I think like most things, it enters the sort of public realm and it starts to mean everything and nothing. But I'd like you to consider a vulnerable resident who's classed as such by this council, who lives in temporary accommodation, is housed in a council property. In its first year, TMO officers explicitly threatened their tenancy following their own administrative failure. Since 2017, the same resident has twice been issued notice of seeking possession, also following council's provable, demonstrable failures. Has also been threatened and bullied on their own doorstep by cold-calling officers and letters invoking magistrates, in every case erroneously. It might not surprise some of you to know that that resident was in fact the elected member for Colville Ward. I'm talking about myself, and have not made any mention of my status as a resident and my personal experience on the ground of how this council treats us. In 2020, I became involved and saw firsthand how this council fights us to ensure that we have no voice when it comes to development on our doorsteps, in our homes, and cutting our services while they do it. Councillor Campbell says the culture change must be underpinned by connection. Bollocks. Culture is underpinned by material conditions, by economic reality. So, while I'm cautious of deploying an overused term with a somewhat diluted meaning, when an authority spends 7 years listening while continuing to cut services and hoard extraordinary wealth and smugly telling us that we don't understand, I can't think of another word. I'm open to suggestions. also mention that my father moved out of Grenfell, so those are names that are familiar to me as well. And yes, sir.
I now call upon Councillor Wheel to speak for up to 5 minutes. Councillor Wheel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to reflect on our discussions in the Overview and Scrutiny Committee about the report and our suggestions for how the Council should respond. So I want to start by saying what I said in the committee, which is that every report like this, there's always one sentence that stands out or has a particular meaning for you. And for me, it was that building control was the last line of defence. And it failed. And it had a responsibility to protect the public, and it wholly failed to fulfil that function. And that sentence stayed with me as I read the rest of the report. And I think the sense of sadness and shame that didn't happen should both be reflected in our written response, but also it inspires me to carry on an active response and reaction to those events, to try to change things for the better. And I think that needs to be reflected both in the response and in our actions. The first one of the Greg has gone through those areas where we particularly thought that we need the report's findings need us to stay on and to monitor some particular aspects of a council activities. So I won't dwell on those. I want to dwell on 2 or 3 other things. The first of which is consultation. That's a theme that has risen up during this discussion several times. And it was certainly something that the committee acknowledged. And we've also acknowledged throughout the long process of looking at the future of Grenfell services, the important role played by the external scrutiny partners that we were asked to retain and did retain. And I think they've given us some really helpful input over the process that we as a council need to learn from, perhaps carry on with in some respect, or learn the lessons from, and continue. I think it's been really a helpful way of making us look at things in a different way. I know we've tried to change before, but I think this has given us an extra impetus. And that's certainly reflected in some of the discussions we've had around pace of consultations, not hurrying the end bits. And I know, and I hope and know that we will carry on with that. We've talked about accountability and the wider themes that I alluded to in the public inquiry around things like racism, but which the inquiry doesn't dwell on. But that doesn't mean that the committee didn't feel that meant that we shouldn't include it in our response to the inquiry, because of the importance that the community and indeed the council attached to it. And finally, I want to address one of the comments made in the report about weakness of data. And that's data as a resource. We will weaken the data that we held to be able to contact people and to coordinate things in the aftermath of the fire, but also data as a tool. Now, I know that this lacks perhaps humanity, but I feel it's really important for both transparency and holding ourselves to account. If we're asking ourselves or expecting of ourselves, which I truly hope we are, new standards, new ways of behaving, then we need to consciously manage and seek and discuss data to either prove to ourselves that we are changing, that our interactions with residents are more appropriate for the residents, that the feedback from residents is more positive, or that we're not, or that we're failing and challenge ourselves with that. At the moment, I don't think we have the data. I think it's asking, I think we need to look at data in a more sophisticated manner going forward, and I feel that that should be one of the things that we include in our response and resolve to do better going forward, so that we can really pin down on the areas of cultural change which we think are important and then hold ourselves to account on them. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I now invite Councillor Ali to speak for up to 5 minutes. Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll summarise some of the points that has been mentioned. And I would like to thank once again Mr. Mayor for our residents who came this evening and really showing the courage to speak about the event that some of us have experienced. Certainly I have experienced on the night. I was not expecting to be there, but I was on my way to home when I left the mosque during Ramadan prayers, late Ramadan prayers. And I hope this will never happen again in Kensington or Chelsea or anywhere in London or in our country or anywhere in the world for that matter. Hearing people dying and no one can help them, children crying, is something that I cannot get rid of my head. It stays there. And I would like to thank for the family members, bereaved survivors, as well as the chair of Grenfell Unite and the team, Ed, and everyone else who came to speak at this event. And I'm sure it has been mentioned of many organizations who supported during the tragedy, but after that, working month in, month out to organize Grenfell walk, a silent walk, we have to show them respect. And I thank them for what they do and thank them for the supporting the local community. And I hope justice will be achieved for residents and bereaved and survivors as well. Mr. Mayor, everyone spoke about here the change, and families, as members of our community said, change, not just mention the word change, but the actual words. It doesn't matter if you do not follow by action. And I think what needs to be done and heard and seen, policies on the ground from the council leadership. The main point is also been mentioned that the council or residents feel that has been divided or being treated as not equal and not people who cannot speak for themselves, whereas external organizations or external members are coming to the local wards or local areas to speak on their behalf as they could not speak. That also has to change. Most importantly, Mr. Mayor, the 7-year on, again, the council leadership should show sympathy and compassion and to show respect that everyone who's been impacted. In fact, they too have been dealing with this issue for 7 years. But it's not worth just speaking about themselves or anyone else, but we are all impacted as the councillors, we're all impacted as officers, and at this point I would really like to thank our officers, both current and previous officers, for the work they do, not the ones who've been part of what has happened. Obviously they will be committed, they have committed terrible things, and I'm sure when the time comes, those people will be dealt with. We cannot speak on their behalf, but I want to thank those officers day in, day out, who are sitting right here with us and at this late hour to be part of the work they have done, and the council's news officer as well as the chief executive for briefing us and supporting the local councillors. And on that note, Mr. Mayor, one of the changes that I would like to see as the leader of the opposition is to support councillors, especially Labour councillors, with so many caseworks dealing with the Grenfell issues, where Grenfell happened, but the council not really coming back. So we have spoken to the leader of the chief executive of the council, and I would like to see this implemented soon so that officers can work directly with our Labour group councillors and other councillors for that matter to make sure that the caseworks are done and residents' views are heard and listened to and the work has been done. Once again, I would like to thank you for taking the time, for making sure this meeting goes well, and for everyone else who feels what happened at Grenfell will never happen again. And on that note, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much.
I now invite Councillor Thalasites to speak for up to 5 minutes. Councillor Thalasites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think what I want to say can kind of be summed up in 3 parts tonight, which is first to say a big thank you to the speakers that came and to the community who did so almost all of the heavy lifting in the period before, during, and the immediate aftermath of the fire. Sorry for the failings that the council was responsible for, both personal and collective, and to recommit us to change, because that is the kind of guiding thing that we need to do here today. I think we may think in some ways that we have changed. We may look at some of the things that we have done, whether it's things like new homes or new service standards, but it's clear both from the inquiry report and from what we're hearing both tonight and also evenings like Monday at Morley College, that we haven't changed fast enough. So this has to be a moment at which to listen and to double down on the process of organisational change. I know for me, and I know for many across this chamber, it's a big part of why we became councillors. It's our home. For many of us, it's where we've grown up. We care deeply about making sure that this place is a place that we can all kind of happily call home. And so however painful it may be to go through that process and some of the difficult conversations and things that we might have to do in aid of that, it's vital that we do accept all of the inquiry report recommendations, and that we accept that there were and are failings. We are not yet changing fast enough. And so it really is that message of thank you to the people who are taking a leap of faith in some respects by coming on nights like this, and after 7 years asking us again to change, because it won't be the first time they've done that, and their experience is that we haven't done that quickly enough. To apologise for our part in that, because if that's how our services and our actions are experienced, then we need to do better. And to say that we do want to change. I believe there has been some change, and that we need to accelerate the pace of that change across the piece, and that certainly in the areas that I'm working on, there is lots of work happening to think about some of the issues that we've heard about tonight, like complaints and service standards, and how we can apply our budgets in a way that supports the most vulnerable, whether that's with the cost of living or in complex services like social care. So thank you.
I now invite Councillor Bakhtiar to speak for up to 5 minutes. Councillor Bakhtiar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have been hearing the word change in the past 7 years. We and our residents have been promised by the leader and the leadership team of this council of a better engagement with the residents and all of those who work in the borough. We have also a policy in place to employ our residents as part of the Better Engagement Initiative and look after all of those who work for the council. Motions, as you know, motions are a great way to allow members to bring in matters of local and national interest to the council chamber for discussion and policy change. Mr. Mayor, I have submitted a motion in August 2023 asking the council to employ the traffic wardens directly instead of outsourcing. That was 14 months ago. Then it was motion number 6 in the full council meeting agenda. That was 14 months ago. And we have had an emergency motion earlier this year, which makes it motion number 7. Right now, my motion is number 2 for the next council meeting. This means that the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea Council had managed to debate 5 motions in 14 months, which is shambolic for a council which was responsible for the Grenfell Tower fire, the biggest man-made disaster since World War II in this country. Mr. Mayor, there are a few reasons behind this, but the main reason is that the leadership team in the council wants to finish the council meeting around 9:30 p.m. so those members who signed up for the after-meeting supper could go and enjoy their supper and drinks after every council meeting. This should have stopped after Grenfell Tower fire for good, and allow members to focus on to focus their energy on the council matters and motions, instead of thinking to finish the meeting quickly to enjoy meals and drinks after council meetings. I am not against the idea of members having meals and drinks and to socialize, to get to know each other, but against the timing. This could be done on other days and other times, but not after the council meetings, because it became a major distraction. This feels more than like an exclusive club than a council meeting, and this must end now. Another reason for not having time to debate motions properly is the standing orders, which restricts the council meetings to finish at or around 9:30 p.m. after council, in every council meeting, which means 2 hours of council meeting plus an hour which allocated for members of public addressing the council at the beginning of the council meeting, as we had earlier this evening, which needs to be reassessed properly again. We need to change the standing orders and lift all the restrictions on council meetings, timing, to give time to members to debate all motions on the agenda in every council meeting. To conclude, Mr. Mayor, if the leadership of the council is serious about cultural change, then I would urge them and all of us to suspend the standing orders relating to time limits on all full council meetings from now on, so members could debate all motions listed in the meeting agenda. This is a real test for cultural change. Thank you.
I'll now call upon Councillor Hargreaves to speak for up to 5 minutes. Councillor Hargreaves.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much indeed. And the publication of this report was painful for many people to read, because it takes them back to that night of the fire and the memories that have been with them ever since. So I do thank those people who've come here to speak tonight, because I know how painful it was for them and how they must have felt. I want to speak briefly tonight about a topic that was brought up many times during those talks, those speeches tonight, and indeed by members since, and that is that question of change. But in particular, change relating to the work that we do of the committee that I chair, which is the Audit and Transparency Committee. And if every committee is going to implement change, it needs to look at itself and look at how it works, and look at how it works in the future. And I was, like Councillor was saying, she was a particular sentence in the report struck her, and I was struck by the sentence that talked about a lack of curiosity and imagination. And it made me think about the Audit and Transparency Committee that I chair. I wasn't chair, and none of the members on the committee today, except for one external, were members at the time of the Grenfell tragedy. But it made me think about, are we as a committee, do we lack curiosity and do we lack imagination? And how do we become more curious, and how do we increase our imagination? So we, on our meeting on the 23rd of September, spent some time looking at the report and coming up with some very practical ideas that we need to focus on to hopefully ensure that we do not in the future lack curiosity or imagination. And just some of the ideas that we're going to work on in the coming months to come. And that is, as a committee, like many of the committees that we all sit on, we have just too much on the agenda, which means we don't spend enough time on the real issues that are on the agenda. So we need to review what comes before us, how much time we have, so that we can spend the proper amount of time on the major issues that affect us. One of our roles, and something we need to do much more, is to review the relationship that we as a council have with external organisations. And we increasingly use more and more external organisations to help us implement and deliver the services that we look at. So we need to look much more carefully about, from the audit and transparency point of view, at how we manage those relationships. A key part of the work of the committee is internal audit. a key part of how we as a council hold ourselves to account. And we need to make sure in our work as audit and transparency that we really look at the work of internal audit. We ensure that it works professionally, it has the right people there, works professionally, and we resource it properly. And when we reflect on the stuff that comes before us, they are often incredibly complex issues. And I question sometimes whether we as councillors have got the skills and the knowledge to really, really look at those issues that come before us. So we've got to get much better at understanding these complex issues, train more, have more briefings, invest more time in ourselves, so that when these issues come before us, we can be curious and we can use our imagination to make sure that we look at those issues. Para 7.19 of the report talks about the risk register, and that is another part of the work that we do in audit and transparency. And again, are we really curious enough about that? What is on it? What are the mitigations? What is not on it? And how do we become much better at looking at that risk register? So these are just a few practical examples that when we talk about change, how we as a committee need to make a change so that we are much more effective, and so that in years to come, people cannot accuse us of lacking curiosity and imagination. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillors, as we are approaching 9:30, I'm going to call upon Councillor Addenbrooke to move and Councillor Lowry to second the suspension of Standing Order 24.01 to allow this meeting to finish slightly later at 9:45 and allow all members to speak. Councillor Addenbrooke.
I beg to move, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Lowry.
I beg to second, Mr. Mayor.
In that case, I now call upon Councillor Will to speak for up to 5 minutes. Councillor Will.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to be brief, partly because it is late, but mostly actually because I think there is so much in the report and there's so much has been said tonight, much better than I could say it. But the two things I do want to say are firstly, my thanks to those who came and spoke tonight and for coming to speak with what I would describe as courage, dignity and candour. I know it can't have been easy. And mostly really I wanted to listen to what they have to say and to reflect on it further, and I will do that. And the second thing really I wanted to say to them and to everyone in the tower and everyone in that community is really my profound and enduring apology for how we failed them. And I think it's very clearly laid out in the report, and I certainly accept all its findings. Thank you.
I now call upon Councillor Taylor-Smith to speak for up to 5 minutes. Councillor Taylor-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So rather like Councillor Kamali, I had a speech, but I'm not going to use it. And also, I don't want to talk about the day. I think the emotions have been talked about, people who've experienced that day. And I've always felt that whatever I felt was a drop compared to what the survivors, the bereaved, and the residents felt. But anyway, I've been reflecting, and I'm very pleased that Eddie Defan's still in the gallery. I was reflecting on the fact that in July 1917, I was wearing this suit, and I was sitting in this seat. And it was the first time I'd ever, I'll refer to it meeting you, Eddie, is that he was here and he spoke. And I was reflecting how depressing it made me feel that Eddie is coming here and having the same conversations and making the same issues over 7.5 years later. And that made me feel really quite ashamed. I think, Eddie's come up with a list of suggestions, which I've written down, all of which I think are actually really positive, sensible suggestions, banning the cladding, following the commitments to the recommendations, etc. And there was another one, there was one that he talked about, which again resonated with me, which is the need for the connection of the leadership team to be to North Kensington. And that, coupled with the calls for resignation that I heard again today, reminded me of my first meeting with the community, that I watch on YouTube just to torture myself, to realise how bad somebody can get it wrong. And I was a white chartered accountant that sat there, went to this meeting, and was stood up and starting telling people what was going to go on. And I started getting heckled, and my natural reaction for heckling is always to punch back. And somebody in the audience called me out because a man in the second row got up and he walked out. And she shouted at me and she said, "How dare you speak like that? Because that man's just lost his daughter." And it was as if somebody punched me in the face. And I'm going to try not to get emotional because it still upsets me to this day. Anyway, I sat down and I shot round the back of the room and managed to catch him going down the stairs. And I just said to him, "Look, I am really so ashamed and so sorry." And do you know what he did? He gave me a hug. He gave me a hug and said, "Don't worry about it, I'm sure you get it right." And I just thought that shows the humanity of a man that had gone through what he went through to me. And what then happened was the lady who called me out, then I went and apologised to her, and she said to me, "Right, I want you to go to the Copthorne Tower Hotel, 9 o'clock tomorrow morning." And we had 26 families in that hotel. And I went at 9 o'clock in the morning and I smoked 40 fags and soaked a couple of handkerchiefs. And I met all the people that were there and listened to their first time experience. And I think that connection should be always part of our training. I think it's something we do with anybody who works in housing, post-TMO. Part of the induction is involving residents in that selection panel. Of all our conferences, we have residents coming and talking to make sure that people have that connection, and we must never lose that. And we all know, the TMO, and I had a list of all the wonderful things that we've done, which I'm always very careful about because it should never be self-congratulatory. But when I hear that nothing has changed, I know that's not true. There's lots of things that have changed, but clearly things haven't changed enough. And the other thing I'll just touch on is also reflecting on the role of the opposition party. Because if we are truly going to be the best council, we have to find a way to work together. I've always used this cliche about getting on the bus. And you may not be aware of this, but in 2018, I went to have a cup of tea with Judith Blakeman and Monica Press, and the leader whose name I'm just forgetting, but anyway. And I sat down and I said, "Look, I don't know anything about social housing. I understand property, I'm an accountant, etc. And I really have to do this with you." And Monica used to come to my officer briefings, and I always said to her, "Look, in the chamber you can beat me up as much as you like, I don't care. You can give me the long list of adjectives that I've had thrown at me because of my lack of respect. But we won't stab each other in the back, but I value your opinion." And all of our first developments went through delegated powers. We worked together on that. And after that, when we started to change, she was appointed the chairman of the Housing Scrutiny Committee. Now, it was always a Tory before, but it was such an important scrutiny but it should be done absolutely right, that she was appointed that permission. And so for me, it's yet again a call to the Labour group that we really must try to work together. It shouldn't be
Councillor Taylor-Smith,
chucking black
please
bricks.
conclude.
Anyway, thank you very much, and I'm sorry to run over.
Does any councillor who has not yet spoken also wish to speak? In that case, Councillor Thaxter. Thank you, Councillor Thaxter. In that case, there will be no vote tonight because there will be a report from the leadership team at November's meeting. Item 8 is urgent business. There is none, which means, because there's no urgent business to bring to the Council's attention, this concludes the business of this evening's meeting of the Council. The next meeting of the Council is the full Council meeting scheduled to be held on the 27th of November 2024. Good evening.